Tool 1. Looking for lost memories. Watching Harry and Ron's figures chasing and fleeing down the corridor vanish into the distance, Loren chuckled softly, as if everything had been settled. Hermione picked up the flower-shaped mirror, her fingers tracing the cool surface. On impulse, she raised it and playfully waved it at Loren, eyes glittering, clearly hoping he'd make a fool of himself. Loren lowered his gaze, glanced at her, then snatched the mirror and gave her a light tap on the head. "What are you thinking? A thing I made to be used against me?" he teased. "Ow!" Hermione yelped. "You actually hit me!" She waved her hands in mock indignation, ready to retaliate. Loren laughed and bolted. Near midnight, the moon hid behind thin clouds, turning the sky a misty silver. Stars flickered like pearls. In the vast, mostly empty castle, the sound of boys running echoed down long corridors. Back in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, Seamus was perched on Harry's bed, whispering into his ear. "Loren was the first one to stand up for you," he said. "He called out McLaggen in front of everyone. People called him foolish, getting so close to you, a parcel mouth, like he'd be petrified any minute." Something heavy settled in Harry's chest, but he forced a smile and muted his reaction. He sniffed and joked. "We're all friends here. Why the hushed tones?" Neville was checking the latest portrait passwords. Ron had turned his bedspread into a makeshift chessboard and was absorbed in moving pieces. Loren lay half covered by his blankets, a book slipping out from beneath, secretly reading until he dozed off. Seamus looked around, making sure everyone else was occupied, then hesitantly spoke. "I don't believe you're the heir of Slytherin, but I think you'll find the Chamber of Secrets and the real heir. Can I come with you on your adventures this year?" He tried to sound solemn. "I just want to know what it's like to be brave. I promise not to cause trouble." Harry didn't know whether to laugh or groan. These things don't happen because we want them to. "Please," Seamus pleaded. "I can gather information. I know people in Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, and getting news from Slytherin isn't impossible. I won't slow you down." Harry, annoyed by his persistence, finally relented and asked him to keep an eye on Malfoy. When Loren returned to the dormitory after washing up, he climbed into bed and let his consciousness slip into the alchemy laboratory he'd been seeing in the fantastic book. In the center of the inverted hemispherical room built of red brick stood a large furnace carved from black stone. Hexagrams, scales, and astrological charts were etched across its surface, while inside a sphere pulsed with fiery, magma-like light. Compared to the small furnace transformed from the fantastic book, this one was much larger, and the runes on it were more intricate. Loren suspected the smaller furnace could still be enhanced. "No need to consider ratios or heat, just toss in the ore and it turns into the right material," he murmured, studying the furnace. "It doesn't feel like Flamel's work. It breaks all the alchemical rules, unscientific but very magical. It feels ancient." Flamel, alive and humming in his mind, answered, "Don't pry. You can't dismantle it yet. Weren't you going to use the hand mirror to enter your deep consciousness and search for lost memories? Pay attention. Unlike memory devices like the Pensieve, this mirror constructs illusions," Flamel warned. "What you see is an illusion generated by your own mind. You should watch and listen. Don't interfere." Loren remembered how odd the mirror was. The Bloody Mary illusion that had led him to it in the Forest of Dean, the way he'd stumbled into someone else's vision, and how he'd picked up the mirror afterward. He still didn't know whether that dream had been engineered by a prophet-savvy wizard or was some stray enchantment, but it was free, so why not use it? "Do you remember what I said? The illusion has 3 layers. The first layer is a reflection of reality and carries some real traits. You need to guide that real layer into the second. If all goes well, you'll find your missing memories in the second layer." Flamel paused, frowning. Loren asked, "What about the third layer?" "Don't go into the third layer," Flamel advised. "Whether it's the subconscious or the deeper hidden mind, it's too chaotic. You could get lost, and the third layer can have a reverse effect on your consciousness. Guide the first layer, only watch in the second, and avoid the third." Loren held Flamel's instructions as his consciousness returned to his body in the dormitory. Harry and Seamus were still whispering. Words like Malfoy, warrior, and count me in reached him as indistinct murmurs. Lying in bed, Loren held the small mirror to his face. His dark curls were mussed from the covers. His clear blue eyes were sharp and young. He brought the mirror closer until the reflection filled his vision like a sky. He blinked and felt the hand holding the mirror had become his left hand. Everything in the reflection was reversed. Even the picture of Flamel on the fantastic book's cover looked dull and lifeless. He realized he'd entered the first layer. He shrugged off the blankets. The voices in the room blurred beyond recognition. Loren watched himself and the others with a clinical curiosity, resisting the urge to prank Harry in the illusion. This was too important. "Do you remember anything from before you were 1 year old?" Loren began, guiding the scene. As his voice sounded, the space seemed to freeze. All noises stopped, the wind, the conversations, the candlelight. Then they resumed, and the illusion engaged. Neville, whose memories seemed closest to the surface, answered first. "I don't know. Some things are clear, but I can't tell if they were before I turned one." Harry's voice was distant. "I dream about my parents a lot. I even hear them talking sometimes. Maybe that's a memory." Seamus asked the same question. Loren answered, "Yes, I remember. My hometown is in Devon." At the name, images flooded him, a bustling street of small shops, the bakery where cream puffs were the best sellers and someone always threw in an extra milk candy, a movie theater farther down. The noise of life swelled until it felt like it was right at his ear. Harry and Seamus's whispers shifted into the din and became sharp, intrusive. The dormitory around him began to warp, as if seen through a concave mirror. The ground tilted, and then Loren felt himself fall. When he opened his eyes again, he was wrapped in baby clothes, seated in a simple projection hall. The projector's light flickered across a roughly stretched screen. The rudimentary machine hummed and spat static. Credits rolled. Beside him, a woman with a gentle face, in a sky-blue dress and no older than 20, leaned over and kissed his forehead. "You didn't cry at all, darling," she cooed. "So well-behaved." Her curls smelled faintly of floral perfume. Loren, drifting, leaned into her. A handsome man in his 20s rose, scooped the child into his arms, and adjusted him to sleep more comfortably. With a warm smile, he spoke, offering his hand to the woman. "Mrs. Morgan, I would be honored if you'd visit my home sometime." "With pleasure," she answered, placing her hand in his. The three of them walked shoulder to shoulder into the lively street. They bought pastries. The man split a candy and fed half to the woman, who smiled at the sweetness, then slipped the other half into the child's mouth to wake him for a bite. The small, perfect scene broke when a terrible voice cut across the air. "Peter, you'll pay for this." A catastrophic explosion ripped the street apart. A shockwave hurled mud and stone, blew out storefronts, and split the pavement to reveal the sewers beneath. In a frantic instant, the man shielded the woman and child. The woman hid the child close, hair and sky-blue dress obscuring his view. A shard of stone pierced her chest. She groaned, but squeezed the child tighter, whispering, "Don't cry, don't cry, Mama's here." Warm blood soaked the dress. The woman grew dim-eyed. She didn't know the child had already fainted. Between labored breaths, she kept murmuring, "Don't cry, so well-behaved." Harry and Seamus's whispered chatter, slicing in at the worst moment, shredded the illusion. Loren's emotions hit him like a physical blow. The scene shattered. White cracks spidered through everything like glass. The sound of breaking echoed, and Loren snapped back into himself. Pain flared from the base of his skull into his left chest and lungs. Each breath stabbed. He curled up under the blankets, fighting the searing ache that ran from his throat to his heart. The blue illusion in his eyes fractured into black. Hot tears tracked down his face and fell to the pillow, cooling on the fabric. He didn't cry out. He didn't want his roommates to notice. He didn't want to open the fantastic book again. Didn't want to see anyone or go anywhere. Dawn found him finally reaching out, trembling for the book and slipping into the library. He looked different in the pale light, less boyish, more composed. He recounted the memory to Flamel with careful detail, eyes still swollen. Flamel hovered above his head, glowing like milk, bathing the room in soft light. It warmed him. "Witnessing the death of the people you loved made your emotions erupt," Flamel said slowly. "Your magic flared as it awakened. You were too young. Your soul hadn't reached stability. The surge of emotions and magic stirred something deep in your soul. A fragment of your power attached itself to your eyes. To protect you, your subconscious sealed the memory. That's why releasing it was so agonizing. Loren pressed his fingers to his temples. Will it affect me? Flamel shook his head. Your soul is stable now. Think of it as another magical awakening. There are no lasting effects. Loren acknowledged this with a small hum and fell quiet, staring at nothing. After a long pause, Flamel asked, How will you handle the two wizards who dueled in the street? Loren closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with slow, certain resolve. The victims were muggles, he said. Pettigrew should be tried under Muggle law. Terrorist attacks with mass casualties usually carry the harshest sentences. I'll see he pays for it. Flamel noted, Britain abolished the death penalty. I know, Loren said. He should at least serve what sentence they give him. And the other one, Flamel pressed. Loren's jaw tightened. The other. Black wasn't the real villain here, he said. He's been in Azkaban for 10 years, serving for what happened. He did wrong, but he isn't the whole story. And he's Harry's only known relative. I don't want to become like Pettigrew. I'm going to demand answers from Sirius Black. 2 and 2. The sun also rises. After waking, Loren found he could not sleep again. He leaned against the headboard of the four-poster bed and watched the morning light climb outside the window. The small stone sphere that sealed the resurrection stone spun in his palm. He had thought briefly of summoning his parents' souls with it, but it was only a thought. The dead were gone. He had no clear idea what the world beyond was like, and he did not want to disturb whatever lay there or risk not knowing how to face them. Dawn's crimson glow strengthened, bringing a thin warmth to the cold winter air. Loren still could not reconcile one thing. Muggles and wizards were the same species, biologically undivided, yet because Muggles could not do magic, their lives were treated as cheap. Pettigrew had shown no hesitation in blowing up a street to cover his escape, indifferent to how many Muggles he killed. Sirius Black, accused of crimes that led indirectly to deaths, had cared only for Pettigrew. After 10 years in Azkaban, he felt no regret. If he were given another chance, he would have pursued Pettigrew the same way, regardless of how many Muggles died. The maddening part was that the two real culprits survived while a dozen innocent Muggles died. House elves were treated like slaves, yet Peeves had set Windsor Castle on fire as if it were nothing. Were Muggle lives really worth so little? Loren wanted to ask on their behalf. Before the sky brightened completely, in Wiltshire at the Grand Malfoy Manor, house elves were already up preparing breakfast. Though they were serving only 2 masters, the spread was lavish. Honeyed muffins, grilled mushrooms and tomatoes, a fruit salad of a dozen varieties, chickpeas slow stewed in a thick sauce, each dish exuding an enticing aroma. None of it, however, was being eaten by the masters. Around the dining table, a group of filthy, rude figures, smelling faintly of refuse, were devouring the food with their hands. They ate as if starved for years, grabbing anything and shoving it into their mouths. Juices and scraps splattered onto the expensive carpet in grotesque abandon. Lucius Malfoy stood to one side, anger barely restrained in his pale face. Even dismembered and sold for parts, these beasts were not worth the cost of the carpet. He turned icily to Old Crab, who sat sprawled on the sofa, and snapped, "What do you want?" Half an hour earlier, Dobby had pounded on the bedroom door awake, telling Lucius and Narcissa that uninvited guests had arrived at the manor. Old Crab's huge, bear-like bulk made the leather sofa sink. He grinned, pleasure gleaming beneath his brutish features. "Don't be so formal, Lucius. We're here on the Dark Lord's orders to discuss some matters with you." Crab enjoyed himself. Throughout his life, at school, as a Death Eater, and even in the more respectable years, Malfoy had always been above him. Now the roles had shifted, and Crabby relished being able to lord over Lucius. Lucius's hand trembled within his sleeve. Panic and dread washed over him. Had the Dark Lord returned? No. If the Dark Lord had returned, he would not have sent Crab in person. If the Dark Lord had not appeared, then he could not appear. He had not recovered fully. A storm of thoughts raced through Lucius, each one calculating how best to protect Malfoy interests. The room fell briefly silent, except for the coarse sounds of the intruders at the table. At the far end of the sofa sat Fenrir Greyback, leader of the pack. He did not touch the food. Ordinary fare bored him. He licked his lips and ran his tongue over the 2 jutting fangs on his upper jaw. Only human flesh and blood excited him. Greyback wore threadbare leather. 2 buttons were missing from his jacket, leaving only frayed threads. His eyes were not quite human, tiny, pinched pupils with the whites rimmed in a deep, dirty black. Coarse hair covered his skin. Even untransformed, he could not hide his werewolf nature. His nails were thick and sharpened. He dug them into the leather of the sofa and savored the friction. Watching Old Crab with keen interest, Greyback smiled with a cruel edge. "Have you ever thought of becoming a werewolf? With your build, you'd be far stronger once you changed." Before Crab could answer, Greyback's beady gaze shifted. "Oh no, you're too old. How about your son? I could make him the leader of a pack. Ha ha ha!" He laughed, and seeing Old Crab bristle, quickly called it, "Just joking." Old Crab breathed hard, fury and triumph mixing. These beasts would be skinned. The Dark Lord would surely tame them into dogs when the time came, he thought. Lucius cut through the farce. "What do you want to discuss with me?" "We need to get people out of Azkaban. We need your cooperation," Greyback said. "Get people out of Azkaban?" Lucius barked incredulously. "Who do you take me for, the Minister for Magic? Even he can't do that." Human emotions are complex. When you are miserable, someone worse off makes you feel a little better. When you are angry, someone angrier makes your anger feel smaller. Old Crab felt this now. Lucius's fury fed his appetite, and with it, his face softened as he spoke. "The minister couldn't do it, but without the minister, this becomes possible." "What do you mean?" Lucius demanded. "We need you to host a banquet on a full moon night," Old Crab said. "Gather the ministry's senior officials. Leave the rest to us." Lucius was stunned. Terror and disbelief fought across his face. "You mean an attack on ministry officials?" Greyback sneered. "Of course not. We will do something that prevents them from reacting, while the bigwigs sit enjoying fine food and wine." Lucius lowered his head, considering. Old Crab leaned in, voice oily and sinister. "You can either warn Dumbledore or do as we say. There's still time to decide." He stood. "Let's go." Greyback rose and called to the others slinking at the table. One by one, they coalesced into a black, vaporous mist and slipped out of Malfoy Manor, melting into the pre-dawn fog. A door creaked. Narcissa rushed downstairs and froze at the sight. The dining room was chaos, the expensive carpet fouled, the table ruined, the sofa torn. What did they come for? Has the Dark Lord returned?" she asked, trembling. Lucius, tired beyond his years, raised a hand. "Don't worry needlessly, and say nothing about the Dark Lord to anyone. Write to Draco. Tell him not to come home for the Christmas holidays this year." He went up to his study to begin planning the banquet. Draco, whatever happened, must be kept safe. Narcissa found something to hold onto in that command, and color and strength returned to her face. Dobby, get in here and clean this up at once." The manor erupted into frantic activity. At Hogwarts, the Great Hall fell silent as Harry and his friends entered. Small wizards from all 4 houses watched, some searching for signs of the Chamber of Secrets. The Slytherins stared coldly. They could not understand how a Gryffindor might be called the heir of Slytherin. Muggle-born students peeked nervously and quickly looked away when Harry met their eyes. Caught between moving forward and stepping back, Harry was shoved into the hall by George and Fred. "Look, everyone, the heir of Slytherin," they crowed. "Be careful, he's a dangerous wizard." Harry stumbled, a ridiculous sight that sent Wood, Angelina, and others into laughter. The Gryffindor Quidditch players greeted him with exaggerated cheers. Amid the noise, Harry found his courage, strode to the long table, and sat down to breakfast. Ron bumped him with a laughing shoulder. "Half the school thinks you go down to the chamber every night." To my surprise, half still believe me, Harry replied. They bantered on, oblivious to Loren sitting nearby. He had been there a while, which was not surprising. He was diligent and often woke early. But Hermione noticed something wrong. Loren looked hollowed out, his mood heavy and visible. He had slept little the night before, dozed only briefly with that strange book, and a year of memories had been unlocked, leaving him exhausted from the onslaught of magic and recollection. He had barely eaten the night before, only snacking in Dumbledore's company. At the first gray of dawn, his stomach had felt empty. He had imagined he could eat an entire cow. Yet at the long table, he managed only half a croissant before the world started to swim. Then a familiar voice asked, low beside him, "Loren, are you all right? Didn't sleep well last night?" Loren blinked, dazed, and barely gave Hermione a look. His mind felt jumbled. He mumbled inarticulately, "Hmm?" His normally clear crystal blue eyes were gone. Dull black pupils stared out of eyelids rimmed with crimson. Tear-streaked lids showed he looked as if he hadn't washed in days, an abandoned, injured young animal. Hermione's heart clenched. She guessed something had happened after he'd left the dormitory, but she did not press in front of everyone. Instead, she wrapped some food in parchment, tied it in a cloth bag, and hauled Loren toward the bathrooms. "We're going to brew a potion," she told Harry as she passed. Loren was dragged along, his body jostling with each quick step. Something of his composure returned. He focused slowly, trying to assess where he was. Hermione pushed him into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and stopped, gripping his shoulders. "What's wrong with your eyes?" she demanded. "What happened after we parted last night? Did you get a letter from home? Is Grandpa Bates ill? You went home to see him. What happened?" She rattled questions until her face went pale and her eyes widened as if grasping a terrible possibility. "Is Grandpa Bates seriously ill?" Warmth surprised Loren at the sight of her concern. He smiled faintly and tried to soothe her. "Don't worry. It's not that." He sat at a cauldron, lit the fire, checked the polyjuice brewing and added more potion. As he stirred, he told a condensed version of how his memories had come back, careful now not to name Sirius Black or Pettigrew, saying only that his parents had died, caught in the crossfire of a duel between two wizards. "Are my eyes different?" he asked, touching his swollen lids. Flamel had said the oddness in his gaze came from an overflow of soul power. When his memories were unsealed, his eyes seemed to be returning to their original color. He wondered if his magical sight had returned. As he blinked at the potion, a strange, magical light flared and then faded at the edge of his vision. The appearance had changed, but the ability seemed intact. Hermione thought a moment and then gently urged him. "Don't shut yourself away, Loren. You still have Grandpa Bates, and you have us, your friends." Loren watched the whirlpool in the cauldron as the brew spun, its motion hypnotic. "I know. Don't worry." Hermione frowned, softening. "Listen to me, Loren. Don't bottle things up. If you're hurting, cry. Talk to us." "I've been in an orphanage since I was 1, Loren said slowly, his stirring growing more deliberate and his voice flat. "I don't have deep memories of my parents. Getting those memories back made me sad, but I'm getting better." He handed the stirring ladle to Hermione. "You finished the potion. It was always your job." Hermione's breath caught. His casual shrug and sudden deflection turned her pity into a heavier ache. She fumbled for words, something about life, souls, death as an adventure, anything to comfort him, but thinking itself drained her. Just as she opened her mouth, she heard a long, even breathing beside her. Loren had folded himself cross-legged on the bathroom floor and fallen asleep. Hermione stared at him, stunned. 203, Third Attack Great Hall. Harry didn't leave at once after breakfast. He pulled Ron down to sit with him at the Gryffindor table, eyes constantly flicking toward the Hufflepuff table and putting the younger Hufflepuffs so on edge they could hardly eat. As Hermione had said, he wanted to find Justin and explain. He scanned the room for him, but couldn't spot Justin, only many frightened Hufflepuffs. "They can rest easy. At least I won't suddenly summon a basilisk at breakfast and make them all a basilisk's breakfast," Harry muttered, biting his bread. He chewed it like he was gnawing on the flesh of those who doubted him. Ron shrugged. "Maybe Justin's too scared to leave his dorm. We won't find him here." "Then what should I do? I can't just break into the Hufflepuff common room," Harry snapped. Ron sighed. "We'll be in the same classes." "Harry, Ron." Rolf slipped in beside them and sat down, peering left and right. "I have something important to tell you." Rolf's grandfather studied all kinds of magical creatures. With his help last time, Harry and Ron had identified the chamber creature as a basilisk. If Rolf had come with news from him, Harry's face lit up. "Have you found a way to deal with the basilisk?" he blurted. Ron brightened too, but Rolf's face stayed grave. He lowered his voice. "Do you remember what happened between Rubus and my grandfather?" Harry had a vague memory. Newt Scamander had passed through Hogwarts, given Hagrid an acromantula egg. Hagrid had raised Aragog in a cupboard, and afterward the Ministry had punished Hagrid, expulsion, broken wand, banishment from the castle. Dumbledore had later seen Hagrid righted with a job as gamekeeper. Rolf went on, "My grandfather always felt guilty. He wrote to a friend in the Department of Education, tried to help clear Hagrid's name. You know, with crimes about keeping dangerous animals, a judge can have some discretion." "Praise Mr. Newt," Harry urged. "And? Was it successful?" Rolf looked down and shook his head. "My grandfather's friend checked the old files. It's not as simple as just keeping dangerous animals." The words tightened Harry's chest. He guessed what came next. "The files say Hagrid opened the Chamber of Secrets and set the monster loose, and that Myrtle Warren died. There wasn't enough evidence to imprison him otherwise." Harry's breath stopped. He had long known Hagrid had a weakness for enormous beasts. Last year, he'd tried to raise a dragon in his hut. If not for help from others, Hagrid might have been expelled outright. Harry didn't believe Hagrid would deliberately kill someone, but he could imagine a young Hagrid hearing about a cute, big creature trapped in the castle, wanting to see it and help it stretch its limbs. The thought made Harry sink into distress. The culprit he'd been hunting might be a friend. "Honestly, I still don't think Hagrid is the heir of Slytherin," Ron insisted, cheeks screwed up with confusion. "Hagrid and Slytherin, I just can't make those connect." Rolf drank some milk and, after a breath, said quietly, "My grandfather thinks the same. It involves someone else, Tom." Before he could continue, Dumbledore appeared beside them, smiling. "Ah, news from Newt. Rolf, did your grandfather mention me?" "Headmaster!" Rolf blinked, then, awkwardly, "Yes, he mentions you often. He asked me to send his regards." Dumbledore, in a loose gray robe, spectacles half-mooned on his nose, looked as gentle and inscrutable as ever. "Coincidentally, I have a letter I'd like you to deliver to him. Could you wait in my office? I should speak with Harry." "Of course, Headmaster." Rolf shot Harry a warning look, "Be careful," and slipped away. "Oh, and today's password is butterbeer," Dumbledore added as he sat down with them. A ripple of whispers from other tables floated across the Great Hall. "Look, Dumbledore must be interrogating Harry Potter. He'll be locked up in Azkaban soon. We're safe now." The murmurs buzzed at Harry like summer flies, irritating and painful. Ron shifted uneasily before blurting, "Headmaster Dumbledore, do you believe Harry is the heir of Slytherin?" "Ron," Dumbledore's voice rang out, "I do not believe Harry attacked those students." Dumbledore raised his voice enough for many at nearby tables to hear, and Harry felt the tension ease. "You don't think it's me, Professor?" he asked, hopeful. "No, Harry, I don't." Relief flooded Harry and Ron into broad smiles. Dumbledore filled a clean plate with food, bread, bacon, roasted mushrooms, and after a moment, tapped his knife and fork together to produce a bright chime. "Remember what I told you. Trust yourself. Trust your friends." He then grew serious. "But I must speak with you, Harry. Is there anything you are willing to tell me? Anything at all?" There was so much to say. About Malfoy and the chamber, about the chamber opening 50 years ago, about Hagrid and a basilisk, about the polyjuice potion brewing in the girls' lavatory. Harry stared at the food on his fork and said, "No, nothing at all, sir." Dumbledore sighed, glancing at his uneaten plate. Harry stood, pulling Ron up with him. He nodded to the headmaster. "Please enjoy your meal, Professor. Ron and I have to go." They slipped out of the Great Hall and vanished around the corridor corner. Snatches of conversation followed them. "Why didn't you tell Dumbledore?" "No need. If we find the real heir, it'll all come out." The lavatory where the polyjuice potion brewed was bright, the window wide open, letting in clear daylight. Sunlight painted the room, making it almost too warm for sleep. Loren woke slowly, back against a soft, warm support that smelled faintly of shampoo and soap and milk. He realized he'd been leaning against Hermione. She'd let him use her as a backrest because he'd been nodding off on the cold floor. Hermione turned and met his eyes. Calm in tone, though, pink flushed her cheeks. "You were swaying in your sleep. I thought the floor wasn't clean, so I let you lean on me." The girl's scent and the softness of her shoulder chased away Loren's gloom like sunlight. "Thanks," he said, grinning as he stretched. His joints popped pleasantly. Hermione had already checked the potion. If Loren didn't want to bring something up, she wouldn't force him. Instead, she spoke practically. "It should be ready before the Christmas holidays. I've decided to stay at school for Christmas. What about you?" "I'll stay too." Loren crouched and stirred the thick brew with the ladle. "Remember to write home." "I will. Tonight. You write too, and have Hannah send them both back. Clear winter days were rare. Soon thick clouds rolled back in and the temperature plunged. The first snow of the 1992 winter fell over Hogwarts and didn't stop. Despite the circumstances and the failed first event, the dueling club still ran, and even managed a second and third meeting. Lockhart invited Professor McGonagall to demonstrate advanced transfiguration for use in duels. Chairs, goblets, even stones transfigured into beasts could decide a fight. For the third meeting, Professor Flitwick showed dueling charms, small, precise, perfectly timed spells that could be devastating in skilled hands. The most entertaining part for students was the head-to-head duels of their own year. Gryffindor and Slytherin students, eager to best each other, the professors guarding them closely, or someone would have ended in the hospital wing after every match. None of that interested Loren, Harry, and the others. They avoided the club entirely and kept waiting for the polyjuice to be ready. In the second week of December, Professor McGonagall began taking roll of students planning to stay at school for Christmas. Most chose to go home. After Harry announced he would stay, some who had been thinking of staying changed their minds and went home instead. Fred, George, and Ginny decided to remain rather than accompany the Weasleys to Egypt to visit Bill. Percy stayed as well. He'd told them with some pride that as a prefect, he had a duty to support the staff during this turbulent time. Snow fell thicker and darker, sealing the windows and dimming the castle. Students still ventured outside during breaks for fresh air. Loren's group stood in the gazebo at the center of the grounds, watching flakes swell and fall. Because Harry was with them, most students gave the area a wide berth. Ron blew on a tiny blue flame trapped in a glass bottle and laughed as a Hufflepuff hurried by, eyes wide and steering clear of them. "If this mood could last until the next Quidditch match," he said, elbowing Harry, "they'd fly right around you, afraid you'd petrify them. Ha!" Harry didn't respond. He scraped at the snow on the railing with numb fingers until they were red. Hermione recited her notes from Animagus class in a steady voice, then looked at Harry. "What are you even thinking? Letting them spread these rumors and doing nothing. You haven't visited Hagrid in almost a month. Do you really think he's the heir?" Loren, who'd been staring at his reflection in the pond, looked up. "Didn't I say it? The chamber monster is a basilisk, and Hagrid raises acromantulas. Basilisks are natural enemies of acromantulas. Considering Hagrid's care for Aragog, he couldn't be involved with a basilisk." He'd been trying to deflect others' suspicions these past days, but he couldn't recreate the certainty he'd felt in Dean Forest. Hermione pressed on softly, "If you care about this, go and explain to Justin. Tell him you were trying to save him, not set some giant snake on him. He wouldn't believe me, not Justin, and not the others. As long as the headmaster and the professors believe me, when we catch the real heir, everything will be cleared up," Harry said flatly. "Whether they believe you now or not is their problem. You just have to do your part," Hermione answered. Under that steady insistence, and prodded by friends who wouldn't let him sit on his hands, Harry finally agreed to go and talk to Justin. The sky darkened further, thick clouds blotting out the light until only a few thin rays slipped through. A sharp wind picked up, driving icy snowflakes that stung the skin. The younger students who had been outside for air hurried back into the castle, shivering and muttering as they crowded the corridors. Neville pushed against the stream of people and came straight to Loren, eyes wide with terror, his fingers shaking as he pointed up the stairs. "The third floor. Justin's been petrified, and Harry's there." His voice broke into a sob. Ron was already rushing off before Neville finished. Hermione grabbed Loren's arm and pulled him after them. Loren ran with a hollow feeling in his chest. Whatever chance Harry had of clearing himself felt smaller than ever. The third-floor corridor was dim, the wind whistling through a loose window pane. Torches had guttered to embers. Justin Finch Fletchley lay on the flagstones, cold and rigid, terror frozen on his face. His vacant eyes stared up at the ceiling. Nearly headless Nick floated nearby, but his usual faint, ghostly glow had turned a smoky, inky black. He hovered 6 inches above the ground, his head hanging by stiff skin and sinew, his face frozen in the same horror as Justin's. Harry stood beside them, mouths half open, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Students clustered around in a ring, watching him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. When Harry tried to explain, they stepped back from him, unwilling to meet his eyes. Loren and the others pushed through and closed around Harry. The outer circle of students chattered nervously. The inner circle was silent, watching Justin with pity and Harry with a kind of fearful curiosity, afraid that a wrong word might draw the monster's attention to them next. Harry. Ron's voice sounded small. He wanted to say more, but couldn't. Harry's expression came into focus. This time there were no other witnesses who could clear him, only he and the victims. He clung to his friends like a drowning man to a rope. "It wasn't me," he gasped. "I went to talk to Justin. He and I had a misunderstanding. I was in the library because I was upset. I walked here and found them like this. Please believe me." His breath came in sharp, wet gasps. His heart hammered so loud it seemed everyone could hear it. Loren put a hand on his shoulder. "Calm down, Harry. Don't rush. We believe you." Hermione, Ron, Seamus, and Neville echoed their support. Their steady voices steadied him. Then a clear, cold voice cut through the corridor. "Silence!" Professor McGonagall and several other teachers had come through the crowd, their faces grave as they slid past. She looked down at Justin with a pained expression, then turned to the students, voice clipped. "Back to your classrooms." The pupils hesitated, eager to watch but too frightened to disobey, until McGonagall tapped her wand and the air popped like a drumbeat. "Now, all of you, back to your classrooms." They dispersed in a hurry. As the crowd thinned, Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff arrived, breathless and pointing at Harry. "Caught in the act," he declared. Harry felt the old accusations from the library, like fresh wounds, the things Ernie had said about him, that a baby surviving Voldemort's attack must be unnatural, that only a dark wizard could have escaped such a curse, that being able to speak Parseltongue marked him as Slytherin, mean, speculative remarks that now stung like knives. For a second, he wished it had been Ernie on the floor instead of Justin. "Enough!" McGonagall snapped at Ernie. He opened his mouth, then shut it when he met Harry's eyes and slunk away. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra took Justin toward the hospital wing. When the students had gone, only Loren, Hermione, and Ron remained with Harry and McGonagall. "Professor," Harry managed, voice raw, "I swear I didn't." McGonagall's usual sternness softened when she looked down at him. She reached out and smoothed his hair with an unexpected tenderness. "I know it wasn't you," she said quietly. Harry's eyes stung. McGonagall turned to the three who hung back. She produced a large fan with a twist of her wand and handed it to Loren. "I'm taking Harry to the headmaster," she said. "You three take Nick upstairs and fan him. He has no physical form, but for the moment he's immobilized. Come." They watched her go. As Loren, Hermione, and Ron climbed the stairs, fanning the floating, pale ghost, they commented on how odd it was, objects and wind affecting a ghost, but ultimately shrugged. Magic didn't always make sense. Hermione, however, was brooding. "Do you think Minerva knows more than she's saying?" she asked. She didn't seem surprised to find Justin, and she believed Harry straight away. Ron chewed his lip. Dumbledore acted strange, too. He was right there when Rolf Crouch interrupted us in the library. It was like he knew what we were up to, but let us carry on. Loren made a noise of agreement. None of it could be taken for nothing. Dumbledore's restraint could be another kind of message. If Dumbledore and McGonagall were playing a longer game, it might mean they'd deal with the basilisk soon enough, if they had time. They reached the massive stone gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office. McGonagall whispered the password, "Lemon Drop," and the beast stepped aside, revealing the spiral staircase. At the top, a shining oak door with a brass griffin knocker stood half open. "You wait outside," McGonagall told Loren curtly. "I have something to discuss with Headmaster Dumbledore." She pushed the door and hurried in. Harry followed at a distance. The door didn't close fully behind them, and a thin sliver of sound leaked out. McGonagall's voice, so controlled most of the time, was bright with anger. "Albus, what on earth are you thinking?" she demanded. "It's almost 2 months since Halloween. How long do you intend to let this go on?" Only faint snatches of Dumbledore's reply came through the crack. "Do you know how many letters we've had from parents? If we don't get a grip on this, the school will be closed." Harry's heart lurched. Closure of Hogwarts was the last thing he wanted. Against his better judgment, he slipped inside. Portraits that usually gazed at visitors had been turned face to the wall. No witnesses would spot him. He crept between shelves and froze when he saw the Sorting Hat, old and patched, sitting forlornly on a shelf. Memories flashed. Malfoy in the train compartment, the Sorting Hat's mutterings at the feast, the shock of everyone when they learned he could speak Parseltongue. A sudden, irrational thought struck him. What if the hat could tell him more? He picked it up, set it on his head. The hat sagged down and covered his eyes. Its whisper rustled against his ears. "Something you can't figure out, Harry Potter?" Harry's tongue went dry. Before he could answer, the hat added, loud in his mind, "You want to know if I put you in the right house? Yes, your placement wasn't easy, but I still stand by it. You would do very well in Slytherin." The words hit him like a blow. His stomach lurched, nausea rising. In panic, he yanked the hat off. It caught the edge of a nearby gilded perch and knocked Fawkes, who'd been dozing above the mantel, from his perch. The phoenix flailed, feathers suddenly gone. He fell, let out a strangled cry, and erupted into a ball of fire. Harry scrambled forward and snatched at the bird, but the flames died down, and only a mound of smoking ash remained on the office floor. For a heart-stopping moment, Harry felt he had destroyed Dumbledore's companion. Then Dumbledore stepped out from behind a shelf. He looked at the ashes and, despite the scene's horror, the corners of his eyes crinkled. Harry broke into a stumble of words. "Headmaster, Fawkes, I didn't mean to. He fell and then—" Dumbledore laughed, small and warm, and the sound was enough to stop Harry's tears. "Fawkes is a phoenix, Harry," he said gently. "When a phoenix dies, it bursts into flame, and from the ashes a new phoenix is born. Look." Harry bent and peered. A tiny, wrinkled, pink chick was pecking at the ash, featherless and a little wet. It blinked up at him with a grumpy chirp. The reborn Fawkes seemed displeased at the attention. "He's been reluctant the last time," Dumbledore went on, smiling at the chirp. "He keeps putting off his renewal. I even asked Newt Scamander to fetch a few things that might assist." He guided Harry to a chair. McGonagall was gone. She must have left while Harry had been fumbling with the hat. Harry wiped his face and forced himself back to the reason he had followed McGonagall. "Professor, do you believe me? I didn't do this." Dread settled in his chest again as the Sorting Hat's voice looped in his mind. "You would do very well in Slytherin." For a moment, Harry wondered himself if he might be the heir everyone feared. "I believe you, Harry," Dumbledore said. His fingers absently steepled together as he studied the boy. "But more importantly, I need your help." "My help?" "Yes." Dumbledore's eyes were serious. "Some members of the governing body are unhappy with how Minerva has been handling things. They'll use this crisis to force changes at Hogwarts. Minerva and I both want to discover the truth about the Chamber of Secrets and the creature within it, but we're far too conspicuous. The heir, whoever he or she is, knows the castle far better than we do and is wary of the staff. We need people who move about the school unnoticed." Harry's face fell. "We've been trying, Polyjuice, questioning Malfoy, but it's messy, and I don't know if we're getting anywhere." "Exactly," said Dumbledore. He went to a shallow stone basin on a shelf rimmed with curious runes and picked it up. He placed it on the table. The surface inside shimmered like liquid silver, rippling as though stirred by a breeze. It looked like memory made visible. "What is that?" Harry asked. "This is a pensieve," Dumbledore replied. "When my head becomes too full, too many thoughts, too many memories, I remove them and store them here so I can examine them more clearly. The images keep their shape and connections better when they are set apart." He tapped the surface with his wand, then drew the tip along his temple. A wisp of silvery substance rose from his hair, like smoke made solid. "Let's see what happened back then," he said. After they had helped nearly headless Nick recover, Loren, Hermione, and Ron returned to the Gryffindor common room to find Harry already sitting by the window. The other students kept their distance, wary of getting too close to someone who had just been involved in another petrification. The three rushed over and sat beside him. Harry looked a little dazed. Hermione slowed her speech. "Harry, did Headmaster Dumbledore say anything?" Harry blinked, then began to tell them what had happened in the headmaster's office. Fawkes the Phoenix, the pensieve memory he'd seen of the events at Hogwarts 50 years ago. He left out the part about his conversation with the Sorting Hat. He told them about the memory that showed Hagrid's wand being broken and Hagrid's expulsion after the Chamber of Secrets incident. He repeated what he remembered Rolf had told them. Ron muttered, "We went over this before. Even if Hagrid liked those big furry things, it wasn't him who let a basilisk loose." "Let me finish." Harry fixed Ron with a look. Myrtle was the victim 50 years ago, but she didn't know what killed her. Just as Hogwarts was about to suspend classes for the investigation, a student named Tom Riddle discovered the acromantula Hagrid had been keeping. The Ministry moved in fast and expelled Hagrid. He swallowed and went on. Dumbledore thought the case was closed too quickly. He defended Hagrid against the pressure, but something in the memory felt off. "Off how?" Hermione asked. Harry glanced around and lowered his voice. Dumbledore's attitude toward Tom Riddle was strange. He didn't trust him. He looked wary in a way I've never seen. Dumbledore's usually so warm. The moment Tom Riddle's name came up, Ron's face had gone quiet as he thought. Then he said, "Tom Riddle, he was a Slytherin. I remember the name. When I had to polish the trophies in detention, I noticed a special services to the school award from 50 years ago. Riddle got one. So he was a model student. Then why would Dumbledore be wary of him?" Hermione frowned. Loren, who had been listening the whole time, cut in. "You all agree Hagrid wasn't responsible for the Chamber of Secrets incident, right?" They all nodded, if a little hesitantly. "Assume Hagrid and Dumbledore were both decent people. Then," he gestured, prompting them, "Tom Riddle must be the bad one." Harry slapped the table as the pieces snapped into place for him. "He framed Hagrid. Dumbledore might have suspected him, but Riddle was careful. He would have covered his tracks." Ron added, "Right. He exposed Hagrid for keeping the acromantula and ratted him out to the Ministry. So maybe he's the one who opened the chamber and released the basilisk back then," Hermione said, pale. "To keep Hogwarts from being closed and to hide himself, he could have made Hagrid the scapegoat." Loren nodded, pleased to have steered them to the same conclusion. "But he graduated 50 years ago," Harry objected. "There's no Tom Riddle among the staff now. Who opened the chamber this time? Maybe he passed on the secret, where the chamber is and how to open it," Hermione suggested. "What we need to do is find out more about Tom Riddle." "He was a Slytherin," Ron said. "Malfoy might know something." "And the Polyjuice potion is almost ready," Hermione added. Word of Justin Finch Fletchley's and nearly headless Nick's attacks spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. The school was in a worse state of panic than before. Professors escorted students to classes in groups, set watches, and stood guard all night, doing everything they could to keep everyone safe. Even George and Fred were kept from their usual nighttime escapades. Students began trading amulets, charms, and protective trinkets in secret, hiding them from the staff. The practice caught on quickly. Neville, for one, was stuffing a pointed amethyst under his four-poster and hanging a rotten newt tail from his bedpost as extra precautions. Harry's bed was nearby, and he complained, nose crinkling, "Neville, what are you trying to do? Turn into Professor Quirrell." Neville wrinkled his nose. "I'm not guarding against you, Harry. It's that I don't want to get petrified. I don't want to lie in the hospital wing. If I'm badly hurt, I'll be sent to St. Mungo's over the holidays to see my parents." Ron and Seamus climbed onto Neville's bed and looped their arms across his shoulders. "Don't worry," Ron said. "You're pure blood. The heir of Slytherin won't pick on you." Neville still fretted, "But they tried to go for Filch first, and you know I'm almost like a squib." "Hey, Neville, you're not the Neville you used to be," Loren said, sprawled out and looking into Bloody Mary's mirror with a bit of vanity. "Remember? You beat Crabbe. You handled a giant snake like a pro. You're a Gryffindor champion now." Seamus, green with envy, started to squirm and make a fuss as if trying to prove something. Eventually, Neville felt comforted enough to toss his bizarre protective stash aside. The amethyst, the newt tail, and the grumpy, envious Seamus all went flying. On Friday, a notice went up announcing the fourth dueling club activity. The bulletin board was surrounded by students eager to read it. "The instructors are Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout. Lockhart's not on it," Lee Jordan read aloud from the notice. "This session will demonstrate the use of magical plants in dueling." Ron could barely hide his excitement. "Great. Dumbledore and McGonagall must have seen through Lockhart's, whatever that was. No more of his terrible live demonstrations. Since the Cornish pixie incident, Lockhart had avoided practical exercises in class and turned defense against the dark arts into his own melodramatic performances. Harry had been forced into a series of ridiculous roles. A Romanian villager, a Himalayan yeti, a vegetarian vampire, even a supposedly reformed werewolf. Will Professor McGonagall take part? Will she use her animagus form? Neville wondered. She didn't use it when she showed transfiguration in dueling. Maybe an animagus form wouldn't be allowed, a student nearby guessed. By the way, how are you getting on with your animagus exams, Neville? McGonagall said they'll be after the Christmas holidays. Neville's confidence wavered. I don't know. There's a lot I still don't understand. Hermione and Loren exchanged a helpless look. Hermione set down her notebook with a soft, hopeful tone. I really want to take part in the dueling club. Loren patted her shoulder. Harry can't go, so think of it as doing it for him. There'll be more chances. Next time, we'll be in it for sure. On the day of the dueling club, the Great Hall filled early. Most students arrived an hour in advance to grab front row places. Harry and Ron slipped out of the castle to see Hagrid and ask about the old Chamber of Secrets case. Loren and Hermione stayed behind in Myrtle's bathroom to guard the polyjuice potion. Loren grew bored and decided to go back to the common room for snacks. On the staircase, he ran into Gilderoy Lockhart, rounding the corner. Ah, Loren! Lockhart's gloomy expression brightened into a practiced smile. What a surprise! You didn't go to the dueling club, I see. You must agree. Without me, it's not nearly as exciting. Loren, who'd always tried to be polite, managed a greeting and tried to slip past, but Lockhart caught his sleeve. A clever, discerning student deserves a reward. I'd like to show you something even better, the manuscript of my new book. Loren remembered Lockhart's insistence about including details of Grandpa Bates in his writing, and masking his reluctance, allowed Lockhart to lead him to the office. Lockhart talked the whole way, grumbling about how the other professors treated him and how Dumbledore had been unfair. I only said I was confident I could find the Chamber of Secrets location, Lockhart said, waving a hand. Sprout pestered me. I meant I've done similar detective work in the Himalayas, searching for a hidden Eastern magic academy. Very easy for me. I also said I could figure out what sort of creature was in the chamber, based on traces. Flitwick turned it into a question of bravado. He sighed theatrically. Honestly, I'd love to take on the monster myself, though there are so many students, and many of them are far too delicate. If I fought the monster here, a lot of you might get hurt. He thundered on as they reached his office, the same cluttered desk, the full-length mirror with a faint perfume of flowery shampoo in the air, shelves full of Lockhart's smiling portraits and photographs. He shoved a stack of manuscript pages across to Loren, as if it were a gift. Out of all the students, I wanted to show you this first. There are a few revisions, but you'll learn so much. He beamed, as if his manuscript were the highest honor. Loren pretended to skim the pages, but only wanted to find the part about werewolves. Lockhart, feverishly excited, pushed on. During the Christmas holidays, I plan to meet Rita Skeeter. Have you heard of her? She's a genius at getting people riled up, even more than I am. I'll persuade her to back up my sensational theories. The Muggle threat, the terrifying werewolf armies, the Muggle King conspiracy. With real info about Muggle werewolves, people will buy anything. I could get into politics, join the ministry, and maybe, in a few years, be Minister for Magic. He trembled with delight at the thought. Loren kept his face smooth. If Lockhart published everything he'd hinted at, Grandpa Bates would be exposed and hunted forever. He didn't want to make a scene, though. Instead, he needed to steer Lockhart into something that would keep him occupied and under control. If Lockhart got sucked into the Chamber of Secrets business, he'd be too busy to chase other stories. Loren met Lockhart's eager gaze with a faint, careful expression. Professor, he said quietly, did you know Headmaster Dumbledore plans to search the Chamber of Secrets at Christmas to catch whatever's inside? Lockhart blinked. Did they say so? They didn't tell me. You could take part, Loren added softly. Your book could use another thrilling adventure. 2 and 6. Hagrid is arrested. The third Friday of December, was the day the students were due to leave Hogwarts for the Christmas holidays. Although Christmas was still almost a week away, Professor McGonagall had given them an early break to make sure those who lived far away had enough time to travel, and because the reformed curriculum was less demanding this term. The castle hummed with festive cheer, and the great hall was splendidly decorated. Hagrid had hauled a dozen silver-frosted trees out of the forest, and thick garlands of mistletoe and holly crisscrossed the ceiling. Percy was locked in a battle of wits with Peeves over the streamers, and it was said that on Christmas Eve, one of the professors would even cast some extra decorative magic. For their own safety, almost everyone chose to go home. Only the Weasleys, Loren, and Hermione remained in Gryffindor Tower. Outside the Great Hall, the corridor leading to the gates teemed with students dragging trunks. They would cross the lawn to the station and board the Hogwarts Express. At the Gryffindor table, Seamus Finnigan sat slumped, looking miserable as he played Exploding Snap with Harry and Ron. He had planned to go on the train with Neville, but Neville had left a box full of candy wrappers on his bed and had gone back to fetch it, so Seamus was killing time. Hermione had spread out her notes, reviewing Transfiguration and filling in gaps. Loren sat beside her, his head almost entirely on her shoulder as he peered at the pages. Hermione's cheeks were flushed and her eyes half-rolled. She had clearly put a notebook between them, but he kept edging closer. It was infuriating. Bang! A dull thud echoed. Seamus's hand had gone numb from another exploding card. He set down his cards, flopped on the table, and muttered, "I don't want to go home. I want to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas." "Who wouldn't want to go home for Christmas?" Ron said in surprise. "We want to go back, but we can't." "I wouldn't mind spending Christmas in the castle," Harry said, looking with some pleasure at the decorations. The holiday brought him a rare sense of peace. At least for the holidays, no one would be hurt, no strange looks or whispers would follow him, and he could come and go from the common room freely and play Exploding Snap as loudly as he liked without anyone being put out. He really didn't want to return to the Dursleys. A few days earlier, Sirius had written with news. The Malfoys had been entertaining many ministry officials at the estate, and he was planning to sneak in and try to learn where the family kept certain unspeakable things. Seamus sighed dramatically. "If the four of you stayed at Hogwarts, something exciting would happen for sure. I wish I could stay. My mum said if I don't go home, she'll write to the headmistress and have me locked up." "Your mum has big feet," Loren sniggered. Hermione rolled her eyes and flicked him. "That's rude." "Seamus, let's go." Neville's voice called from the corridor. Seamus reluctantly glanced at the decorations one last time and then dragged his trunk away. As he left, he leaned back and whispered to them, "I don't know what you're up to, but watch out for Crabbe. A lot of people in Slytherin say he's acting strangely. I'd bet he's involved with the Chamber of Secrets and whoever the Hare is." There were 3 Slytherins still at Hogwarts, Malfoy and his 2 cronies, Crabbe and Goyle. Seamus hurried on. Loren watched him go, struck that Seamus, despite his bluster, had stumbled across something true. He watched the candles bob and thought the great drama Dumbledore had set in motion was coming to a head over the Christmas break. Ron gathered the cards and sighed. Basilisk, Chamber of Secrets, Malfoy, Hagrid, that Tom Riddle fellow, and now Crabbe on top of it all. Hermione snapped her book shut, serious. "Don't just fixate on Malfoy. Maybe Tom Riddle taught Crabbe how to open the chamber. Go over what Hagrid told us." Harry's face tightened as he began to recount what had happened at Hagrid's hut. "We slipped out of the castle during the activity. They had braved the snow to reach Hagrid's hut. Hagrid had welcomed them warmly, and before Ron could sit down, had been asked the question he feared most. Hagrid, do you know someone named Tom Riddle?" The hand that was adding wood to the fire froze. The giant shoulders that almost filled the room slumped. Hagrid's face went rigid with panic. "You found out about what happened 50 years ago, didn't you?" He blurted. "It wasn't me. It really wasn't me. I only kept Aragog. I never let him out of the cupboard. He didn't kill that girl." Fang nosed at Hagrid's leg, sensing his master's distress. "Hagrid," Harry cried. "Listen to us. Dumbledore believes you, and so do we." "Yes, Hagrid," Ron said, taking the firewood from his hand and settling it into the hearth. We came to look into this Tom Riddle." They did their best to comfort the over 3-meter-tall half-giant. Hagrid wiped his nose with the back of his hand. Tom Riddle, he was a brilliant student, like Percy. He got on with nearly every professor. After he left, he seemed to go into Nocturne Alley, and then he disappeared. Nocturne Alley? Harry and Ron exchanged looks. Whoever chose a job in Nocturne Alley was unlikely to be on the right side of things. Harry glanced at Hagrid's pink umbrella, and then at the gentle, simple giant opposite him. Hagrid had carried the burden of disgrace for nearly 50 years. At the thought of those decades of injustice, Harry's chest tightened. "Hagrid, we think Tom Riddle must have opened the chamber 50 years ago and set you up." Harry squeezed Hagrid's enormous hand. "Maybe he is the heir of Slytherin," Ron added. "He's the heir of Slytherin." Hagrid's pupils narrowed. He stood so abruptly a pile of rock cakes tipped over. He graduated from Hogwarts. No wonder, no wonder. No one thought to check his name. He muttered to himself, distracted, then tried to steady his tea, but his arm shook and a drop steamed as it hit the fire. Harry and Ron assumed Hagrid was overcome with relief at the discovery. "Hagrid, did you remember anything else?" Harry asked. Hagrid breathed in and out, looked down at Harry's scar, and, tears in his eyes he held back, said, "Yes, I remembered something important." "Tell us," Harry urged. "Maybe we can find the real culprit and clear your name." Hagrid's jaw set. He stroked Harry's hair, then, with a firmness that surprised them, said, "This is not your business. I'll tell Professor Dumbledore. You mustn't get involved in the Chamber of Secrets. Dumbledore will handle it." Harry went white. "Hagrid, what are you talking about?" "I said go back," Hagrid repeated. Later, at the long Gryffindor table under the floating candles, Harry's face was shadowed. After that, no matter how much Ron and I tried to persuade him, Hagrid kept repeating that, he said. "Doesn't he want to clear his name?" Ron asked. Loren listened and felt a tangle of feelings. Hagrid wasn't refusing because he didn't want his name cleared. He understood far more than he let on. He knew, perhaps in a larger way than they could, that Tom Riddle was someone to fear, and he was trying to keep them out of danger. That kind of selfless silence had cost him decades of grievance. A soft thud sounded as Hedwig, feathers spattered with snow, flew in through the skylight and landed in front of Harry. She cooed urgently and would not stop. The little group gathered, and Harry unfolded the note she had brought. "Hagrid's hut. Come quickly." Harry's stomach dropped. He didn't say a word, he ran. Hermione and Ron were right behind him. Loren lingered a moment, picked up the note that had been on the table, and glanced at it. The handwriting was neat but somewhat formal, as though the writer did not want to be recognized. It was nothing like Hagrid's wild, looping script. Loren slipped the note into his pocket, grabbed his wand, and went after them. They ran across the vegetable garden, past the greenhouses, around the humping willow, and into the edge of the forest. As they neared Hagrid's, voices carried on the cold air. Harry and Ron flattened themselves behind an oak, breathing hard, peeking out from either side of the trunk. Loren arrived last, and seeing the odd tableau, felt a little amused. He tapped each of them with his wand. Faint ripples spread over their clothes, and they faded into the snowy night. "Disillusionment charm," Hermione whispered, covering her mouth in case someone was within hearing. "Shh," Loren said. "There will be footprints in the snow. Let's be careful. Go around and get a closer look." They crept round Hagrid's pumpkin patch and crouched under the hut's front steps. Inside, Fang had been dozing at Hagrid's feet. He lifted his head, barked twice toward the door, and then burrowed back, circling Hagrid's boots. Hagrid, head bowed, peered toward the doorway and smiled absent-mindedly before nudging Fang to quiet him. Voices drifted out. Dumbledore, in his familiar white robes, was standing beside another man who looked like he had just shuffled in from the ministry. Short and stout, with messy gray hair and a worried face, he wore an odd mix of pinstripe suit, bright red tie, black cloak, and purple-pointed boots, a dark green bowler tucked under his arm. "That's my dad's boss," Ron murmured. "Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic." Loren studied the Aurors who had accompanied him. Their magical signatures were not strong, nowhere near the level of Hogwarts professors. They wore identical clusters of light on their wrists and waists, and carried small standardized devices that flickered with barely controlled enchantments, crude ward and communication tools. They looked geared for protocol rather than power. Loren reckoned, privately, he could hold his own against several of them. Dumbledore's voice was steady. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. Cornelius, but I am sorry, there have been attacks, and the Board of Governors has demanded action. The Ministry cannot ignore that. Fudge's voice sounded tight. We cannot detain someone without conclusive proof, Dumbledore continued. Of course, Cornelius, I give you my word, I will not have Hagrid sent to Azkaban. Fudge's expression flickered with satisfaction. Albus, as your friend, you should be prepared. Some of the governors have been very vocal about taking control of the school back from its present leadership. I will keep that in mind, Dumbledore said quietly. Very well then, let's take him, Fudge said, fussing with his bowler hat and stepping forward to the open space before the hut. The Aurors formed a circle. Hagrid stood frozen, then spoke in a cautious voice. If anyone wants to find something, they just need to follow the spiders. That's all I'm saying. He stepped past the awestruck minister. The Aurors cracked their wands. With a sharp sound they vanished, taking Fudge and Hagrid with them. Dumbledore hesitated a moment on the steps, then, in a strangely light tone, said, The centaurs in the forest are very friendly. And he, too, disappeared. 207. Aragog. In a matter of minutes the hut emptied. Snow feathered down around them, and the cold wind made the door sway with a harsh creak. Fang shot out first, nose twitching. He could smell something but could not see anyone, trotting back and forth on the steps and barking in a worried staccato. Loren and the others came back into view, faces tight with complicated thought. Harry stood frozen, mind blank with the image of Hagrid being taken. Hagrid is innocent, he barked, clenching his teeth. He wasn't at the castle when those attacks happened. The Acromantula are in the Forbidden Forest. The Ministry has no evidence, so why take him? Ron sagged against the hut wall. This isn't how it normally works. Hagrid should have at least had an owl summon. How did the Minister of Magic end up leading the team? Hermione's brow was knitted as she thought over Hagrid's last words and the message Dumbledore had left. From the moment Loren read the note, he'd realized Dumbledore hadn't lost control. The message was deliberate. They hadn't been left behind out of carelessness. Hagrid and Dumbledore were signaling them. Fang showed his agitation with a low growl and a rapid wag of his short, sturdy tail. Loren crouched to rub the hound's head. Calm down. This isn't about procedure right now. Hagrid and Dumbledore must have noticed us and sent a sign, Loren said. If we can find the true heir or solve the basilisk threat, Hagrid will be all right. Hermione nodded. Hagrid probably wanted us to go to the Forbidden Forest and find Aragog. That Acromantula might know something about the basilisk. Harry's eyes brightened. They had overlooked that Aragog, like Hagrid, had been directly involved in the original Chamber of Secrets incidents. Hagrid and Dumbledore left Fang here so he could lead us to Aragog, he said. Loren scratched Fang beneath the chin. Right, Fang? Fang seemed to understand. He darted down the path into the trees, casting anxious barks that urged them on. Come on, Hagrid needs us. They set off at once, Hermione and Harry close behind Loren. Ron watched them go for a beat and then hurried after them, jaw set. The four followed Fang deep into the forest. Snow and wind bit at their faces. The cold made Ron shiver. It's winter, he muttered. Shouldn't the Acromantula be hibernating? Will we even find Aragog awake? Loren grinned despite himself. Acromantula are magical. They don't hibernate like ordinary beasts, just conserve energy. We saw active ones last year. As Fang pushed ahead, sniffing and pawing at roots and buried leaves, the forest around them grew denser. They moved in silence for a long stretch. Harry finally broke it. Why wouldn't Dumbledore just get the Aurors to take Aragog, prove Hagrid's innocence, and get basilisk clues? The adults are faster than us. If you ask Mr. Weasley, Ron said, words from a magical creature don't count as legal evidence. Hermione's thoughts were working at a quicker pace than they spoke. There's more. The minister mentioned the school board, governors at Hogwarts. They're furious with Professor McGonagall's reforms. They think those changes undermine their authority, and they pressured the ministry to act. Student safety is an excuse. They're attacking Hagrid to drag Dumbledore down and take back control of the school. Harry and Ron stared, stunned. The Chamber of Secrets suddenly looked less like a simple monster problem and more like a political tool. Cornelius Fudge looks worse and worse, Harry said. He's in league with Malfoy and the others, Ron added angrily. Loren kept pace with Fang, remembering Snape's mention of autonomy and Dumbledore's old caution about power. Since Grindelwald, Dumbledore had avoided grabbing control of people or institutions. McGonagall and a group of like-minded heads wanted Hogwarts to be more independent of outside interference. If the governors wanted to hand control back to themselves, they'd use any pretext. Dumbledore's energies had been elsewhere, training Harry. That had left a gap the governors were eager to exploit. After they'd been walking for about half an hour, the path tilted downward. Fang let out a sharp bark that echoed through the trees. Everyone froze and listened. "Did Fang find something?" Ron whispered, gripping Harry's arm. Loren's eyes went hard. He drew his wand. "This is it." Hermione, Harry, and Ron raised their wands too. From all around them came a soft click-clack of movement, carapaces brushing against bark. Patches of snow along roots rose as if something beneath had pushed up, shook itself clear, and peeled away. Beneath the snow were domes of webbing, hemispherical nests, each one a sleeping bag woven of web. Within moments, the nests stirred, and the acromantula emerged, vast and dark as cart horses, 8 eyes and 6 long, bristling legs, twin glossy fangs at the front. Ron felt his feet heavy as lead. Aragog appeared last, a creature the size of a small elephant. His body was a mottled black and gray, and a white film clouded his many eyes. He was blind. Beside him, an acromantula hissed. "What is it?" "Humans." "Is it Hagrid?" "Strangers." "Kill them. We're sleeping." Loren, chilled from the run, felt the heat of anger kindle where Aragog's voice touched his mind. He pointed at the blind spider. Hermione took his flank. The two of them covered each other's blind spots. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "If we can't beat them, we can run," Loren replied. The spider at which he aimed shuddered as if a cold hand had passed over it. Loren flicked his wand and said, "Expulso." A red flare leapt from his wand and struck a thick beech. It exploded into a black roar of smoke. When the smoke cleared, a huge hole gaped where the trunk had been. Nearby, Acromantula recoiled. Loren raised his voice. "We are Hagrid's friends." Aragog turned his heavy pincers toward them. "Hagrid never sent anyone to our hollow before. He said slowly. Harry stepped forward, breath pluming in the cold. "Hagrid's been taken. The Chamber of Secrets is open again. The Ministry took Hagrid. We need information on the chamber, on the basilisk." The word basilisk made legs skitter and pincers click. A low murmur ran through the spiders. "We found the basilisk," Aragog said at last, his tone part horror, part irritation. "You shouldn't have brought that up. I didn't tell Hagrid its name, though he asked me many times. If it comes into the Forbidden Forest, it will be a disaster for every creature here." It knew about the basilisk, Harry thought, and for the first time something like hope warmed him. "What else do you know? Tell us. We have to save Hagrid." Aragog's voice went flat. "You shouldn't provoke it. It is safer kept in the castle. But fresh human meat has come to our doorstep." The spiders surged. Loren lashed out with a knockback jinx. Brilliant sparks flashed, and several spiders were hurled backward, thudding against trunks and shaking snow down to bury them. But the majority of the spiders only tightened their ranks. One bolder spider barked orders: "Form an iron wall. Seal them in." The acromantula folded their segmented legs and interlocked, raising a solid wall of chitin and pincers. It advanced, slow as a tide. Fang, sensing the danger, slipped through a gap and bolted away. Hermione's fire charm licked at black pincers, but barely singed the thick hair. Harry's Expelliarmus glanced off cuticle like a splinter. Ron, teeth clenched against trembling fear, threw what he could, but the spells fizzled under pressure. Loren took a breath, wand humming with gathered power. "Expulso!" he shouted. Magic condensed into a beam thicker than a tree trunk, like an auroral column, and struck the spider wall. The ground shuddered. Heat rushed in a wave that shook branches and sent a mushroom of smoke into the air. For a dozen meters, snow shivered off the trees. The center of the hollow was a blackened, snowless patch of scorched earth where plants had been reduced to ash. Many of the spiders closest to the blast were mangled beyond repair, blown apart by the force. Others lay scattered with severed legs, bodies battered but still whole. The rest of the wall had been thrown outward, shaken and dazed. The three of them stood staring, chest heaving, as flakes of web and ash drifted through the hollow. They were young, only second years, and their eyes widened at the destructive power they had just seen unleashed by one of their own. Even Hermione, practical and composed, looked shaken. Loren lowered his wand, suddenly aware of the heat in his hands. Since the night he'd regained his memories, he had assumed the violent surge of magic then had been a one-off, an uncontrollable outburst. He had never expected how strong he could be. The hollow that served as the acromantula nest was a wreck. Apart from the weak groans of some spiders, only the cold wind howled, carrying flakes of ice and snow. Most of the spiders lay incapacitated. The few that remained cowered, intimidated by Loren's power, and dared not approach. "They actually wanted to eat us," Ron growled, teeth clenched, looking at the scattered, dismembered bodies. Suddenly, spiders didn't seem so terrifying. The acromantula gathered near Aragog, huddled together, trembling. Although his sight was clouded by the white film over his eyes, Aragog seemed to sense what had happened from the noises around him. He let out a sorrowful hiss. Hermione's face showed a flicker of pity that hardened almost at once. If Loren hadn't been powerful enough, those spiders wouldn't merely be missing limbs, their bones would have been gone. There were other creatures in the Forbidden Forest besides acromantula, but neither the unicorns nor the centaurs would deliberately harm the students. The acromantula had disregarded Hagrid's kindness. This felt like the fate they had earned. The explosion's heat had melted the accumulated snow in the hollow. The cold, hard earth had soaked it up and turned into thick, sticky mud. Harry clambered through the muck and stood before the old, almost dying Aragog. The acromantula that had been relaying messages at Aragog's side trembled and retreated, yielding the spot. Harry, puzzled and frantic, asked, "Don't you want to save Hagrid?" Aragog, as large as a small elephant, breathed weakly and made choking noises. Even in that terrifying form, sorrow showed in his tones. "Hagrid, Hagrid," he rasped, then fell into memories. "I came from a far place. Before I hatched, someone brought me to Hagrid. He was only a boy then. He hid me in a cupboard at the castle and fed me breadcrumbs from the tables. He treated me like a friend. He was good to me. Later, when people blamed me for a girl's death and wanted me killed, he protected me even though he couldn't protect himself. He helped me settle in the forest, came to see me, and even found me a wife, Mosag. Look how our family has grown, all thanks to Hagrid." Harry's anger flared. "Then why won't you tell us how to save Hagrid?" Aragog answered mournfully, "The basilisk is the acromantula's enemy. If you human wizards drive the basilisk out into the Forbidden Forest like you did to me, my family will perish." Tears welled from Aragog's 8 eyes and ran into the grooves of his carapace. Harry couldn't tell if the spider was weeping for Hagrid or his own devastated brood. "I'm old," Aragog went on in a ragged voice. "I don't know how many winters I have left. If Hagrid dies with me, perhaps that is not so terrible." "Hagrid isn't old," Harry shouted. "He can live for many more winters." He felt fury gnawing at his chest. He wanted nothing more than to burn these spiders to ash. Aragog did not argue. His weak breathing confirmed his words. He was old. He did not know how long he had. They were not speaking quietly. Loren and the others on the far side of the hollow heard the exchange. Kept aloft by a levitation charm so they would not sink into the mud, the 3 of them floated unsteadily over to Aragog. Hermione examined the great spider Hagrid had once called a friend. After a long moment, she said, flatly, "Hagrid must have told you not to harm humans. That makes you no friend of his. You don't share any of his goodness." Aragog slumped against the mud, saying nothing. Ron nudged him with his foot. "Don't play dead. Tell us what you know. Hagrid will be back by Christmas," he demanded. Aragog stayed silent. Harry and Ron's patience frayed. No amount of kicking drew words from him. Hermione's face tightened with anger. She strode up and kicked him hard twice. The spider's carapace echoed with the impacts. Aragog groaned, feeling his head spin. He might live several more winters by old age, he thought, but if this small witch kept up, he would not survive today. At last, weakly, he croaked, "I won't say. Keep the basilisk in the castle, and my family will live." Harry cursed. "How could Hagrid raise a thing like you? Even Norbert was better than you." Snowflakes drifted down as the melted patches began to refreeze. Loren shivered, squatted to be closer to Aragog, and spoke so the spider could hear clearly. The basilisk is more dangerous than you spiders. The unicorns and centaurs would never let one into the forbidden forest, and Dumbledore won't leave a threat like that in the castle for the students. Think about what that means. If you won't speak, your whole family dies today." Loren's wand flashed, and with a single blast, he tore a huge ancient tree. 3 people could barely encircle it, clean through. The fallen trunk hit the snow with a dull thunder, and the sound struck Aragog like a blow. Tears streamed inward in the spider's heart. Weren't these Hagrid's friends? Weren't they supposed to be kind and brave Gryffindors? First, the little witch had kicked him nearly to death. Now this wizard threatened his family with extermination. How could they be kind? How could they be Hagrid's friends? Loren tapped his wand gently against Aragog's shell. Each rap of wood on chitin sent a shiver through the spider. With the last of his strength, Aragog blurted, "Pipes! The basilisk moves through the pipes!" He squeezed out the words. "I've always stayed in the lower levels, but there were times the basilisk passed by. I could sense it." Harry's face lit up. "No wonder I've heard the voice and couldn't find its tracks. The basilisk has been hiding in the water pipes inside the walls." Loren tapped again, pressing for more. "Anything else?" "No, no more," Aragog pleaded. "I've told you, leave my family." Loren hesitated. He didn't particularly want to spare the acromantula. He had little patience for cannibalistic creatures, and they had, in the past, aided Lord Voldemort. But since Aragog had cooperated, Loren felt he should keep his word. "Let them go," he said at last. Hooves clattered, and 2 centaurs emerged from the trees, Firenze, silver-maned, and Ronan, with a red mane. "Firenze! Ronan!" Harry called in surprise. They had met the centaurs in the Forbidden Forest the year before. Firenze had saved Harry from Quirrell. Fang padded behind them, shaking his head, and rushed to Loren, leaving muddy paw prints along his robes while barking excitedly. Loren smiled. Fang had gone for help and now wanted the praise. Firenze bounded up, eyes flicking over the devastation. After the huge explosion, they had hurried over and arrived just as the questioning was underway. The sight unsettled him. The power of modern student magic was great. Hogwarts' instruction clearly worked, but the moral side seemed lacking. Physical coercion and threats of extermination were not things he expected from the school. Ronan wandered among the scattered spiders before speaking in a deep voice. "Jupiter's revelation. An appropriate dormancy is better for family prosperity." "What does that mean?" Ron muttered to Harry. Firenze explained, "These spiders have bred unchecked and eaten into the territories of other animals. In a few years, other creatures will unite and exterminate them completely. With your intervention, they can give up some territory and survive a few more decades." Ron shrugged at the astrological phrasing. No one paid much attention. Hermione, thinking of Dumbledore's earlier warning, asked, "Did Dumbledore speak to you first?" Firenze nodded. "He sent word to our elders that you might need help. We met Fang on our way." Ronan asked hesitantly, "What happened at the castle? Why did Dumbledore send young centaurs into the Forbidden Forest?" Harry told them about Hagrid's arrest and what they'd learned. Firenze shifted his hooves restlessly. Ron muttered about planets and omens, and Harry told him to stop teasing. Firenze sighed and said solemnly, "The sun's path has shifted. The world will undergo unprecedented changes." Loren perked up at the word sun. "What changes?" he asked. Firenze spread his hands. "I don't know." All 4 students gave the same inward look. "If you don't know, why bring it up?" Loren gathered his things and said, "We should return to Hogwarts and investigate the basilisk. If we move quickly, we might get Hagrid back for Christmas." Christmas was about a week away. If they solved things fast, Loren could report to Dumbledore and hope for a good holiday. The centaurs escorted them to the forest's edge. Firenze paused, looking back toward the distant castle. "The rest of it is yours, little colts," he said. Ronan addressed Harry and Ron directly. "You 2 are keeping that tin box, aren't you? Get it back. It's been crashing about in the forest, roaring all night. The animals are sick of it." "The flying car," Ron spluttered, delighted and incoherent. "It's not wrecked yet. Oh, wonderful." "We'll take it once the castle problem's over," Harry said, cheeks warm with embarrassment. Crashing the car into the Homping Willow had not been his most brilliant idea. Loren left Fang with the centaurs, saying that Hagrid could reclaim him when he returned. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Loren, Hermione, Harry and Ron sat around the fire, the flames driving away the forest's chill. "We've determined the basilisk has been moving through the castle via the pipes after leaving the Chamber of Secrets," Hermione said. "We still don't know the chamber's exact location." To illustrate, she pulled an empty candy tin from her pocket to represent the chamber, a licorice wand for the basilisk, and a pair of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans as miscellaneous clues. "We suspect two possible heirs, Malfoy and another student, possibly Crabbe. Or maybe neither of them. Perhaps the heir is hidden deeper than we think. We need to get into Slytherin's common room and extract information," she continued, methodical. "Ideally, we learn who the heir is or the chamber's location. The polyjuice potion will be ready before dinner, and most of the castle is empty. Perfect timing. We also need part of the person we'll transform into." She glanced at Harry and Ron casually, as though assigning a chore. "If you can get something from Crabbe and Goyle, that would be ideal. They're Malfoy's cronies, so we could question Malfoy more easily if we're disguised as them. We must also make sure the real Crabbe and Goyle don't barge in when we interrogate Malfoy." Loren produced 2 large bottles of Draught of Living Death. He had an ample supply. Snape and several older students in the Potions Club had brewed good batches. According to Hermione's plan, drug Crabbe and Goyle with the draught so they'll pass out, take a few strands of hair, then hide them in a broom closet. "Right," Harry said, recalling the plan. "But Hermione, Loren, who are you two going to transform into?" Loren shook his head. "I won't transform. I'll stay invisible and accompany you to provide support and deal with anything that goes wrong." He didn't think much information could be got from Malfoy directly, but the clues were almost clear now. The pipes, the bathroom, Myrtle's first death. Once Harry and Ron went back where the basilisk's voice had been heard, Loren could guide them to the chamber. Why use polyjuice at all? Because Hermione wanted to see the little cat girl for herself. "I already have the hair," she said, producing a small vial with a strand inside. "Remember the dueling club? Millicent dragged at my collar, and I took a hair from her. She's gone home for Christmas, so I can claim I'm back." Loren snorted softly. "What's so funny?" "I was thinking something amusing," he said, but he wouldn't explain. After dinner, they slipped into Myrtle's bathroom to finish the polyjuice. Loren and Hermione squeezed into a small cubicle together while Hermione stirred the cauldron until thick black steam rose. Normally, they'd brew in the open and hide the cauldron overnight, but Hermione couldn't bear to move it. The potion was nearly done, so they stayed cramped in the stall. Harry and Ron knocked lightly. Loren and Hermione emerged carrying 3 shallow cups of the syrup-thick potion, still bubbling faintly. "Did you get it?" Hermione asked. Harry held up what he had, a few strands of hair in one hand, the laces of 2 huge shoes, and a large wizard robe tucked under his arm. "I got Goyle's," he said, voice tense. "Crabbe's gone missing." "Crabbe didn't show up for dinner," Ron said uneasily. "We can't find him." Loren frowned, tempted to call off the plan. Hermione pursed her lips. "Harry and I will take the polyjuice potion," she said. "Loren and Ron will follow us invisibly. Polyjuice lasts an hour." Before Loren could reply, Hermione dropped Millicent Bulstrode's hair into a cup of potion. The liquid fizzed and bubbled like a carbonated drink. After a moment, the reaction calmed and the potion turned a sour yellow. Hermione swallowed hers in a gulp. Harry drank his too. They ducked into separate cubicles to change. Ron looked at the remaining slops and skid. "Millicent Bulstrode essence and Gregory Goyle essence. Bet they taste awful." There were cries of pain from the cubicles as the transformations came on, then sudden silence. Harry pushed open his door and stepped out. He was Goyle. His voice was deep and hoarse. "How is it?" he croaked. Ron ran circles around him, slapping his broad back. "It's perfect. Unbelievable." Loren had been waiting near Hermione's stall and knocked after a while. He called calmly, "Hermione, are you all right?" A high, trembling voice answered, edged with tears. "I really don't want to come out. You two go on without me." Harry and Ron hurried over. "Hermione, we know Millicent's not pretty. No one will notice." "No, really, I can't go. You two hurry. Don't waste time." Harry exchanged a look with Ron. Ron grinned to cover his nerves. "That expression makes you even more like Goyle. He always looks like that when a teacher asks him something." "Stop joking," Loren snapped. Hermione's transformation has gone wrong. I need to take her to the hospital wing. Ron, follow the others under the invisibility cloak. You two go ahead with the plan. Harry and Ron checked each other quickly. Harry touched his hands and face to be sure nothing was missing and breathed a shaky sigh of relief. We'll find you in the hospital wing after it's over, Harry said. Ron nodded. Loren hesitated, then reminded them, safety first. If anything goes wrong, make a big enough commotion that the professors have to come. Given what they were up against, that caution was sensible. And even if the safest thing might have been to call off the whole attempt, Dumbledore had said Harry had a right to face what lay ahead, and Harry would face it. After the two left, Loren knocked gently on the stall door in the lavatory and, suppressing a laugh, called, "They're gone. You can come out now. We're taking you to the hospital wing to see Madame Pomfrey." "Go away. No." Hermione's voice was soft and thin, like a tiny, fierce kitten. The polyjuice potion had affected her throat and vocal cords as well. Loren pressed the advantage. "Come on. If Myrtle comes back and finds you in there, the door won't stop her." Hermione fell silent. She thought for a moment and remembered that Myrtle had watched boy prefects bathing. If Myrtle saw her like this, she would never let her forget. Her voice weakened, a quiver in it. You promise you won't laugh at me." Loren's mouth twitched into a grin. He couldn't promise that. Just hearing her voice made him want to laugh, and he wanted to see. He took a breath and forced himself to sound earnest. "Polyjuice potion is a tricky thing," he said. "Small problems can happen. I've read about cases like this before. I'm studying potions. I won't laugh." Hermione, unaware that the boy outside was already imagining a cat girl, relaxed a little. After a pause, she pushed open the stall door. She looked up and met Loren's eager eyes. Before him stood a little cat girl, about 11 or 12, small, round-faced, with bright, wide yellow eyes. Soft fur covered her body, making her look fluffy and pettable. Triangular ears, tipped pink, drooped from her head. A tail peeked from beneath her robes, skimming the floor. "That's cat hair!" Hermione cried, indignation and humiliation in her voice. "Millicent must have a cat, but Polyjuice potion isn't supposed to turn you into an animal." Loren's fingers twitched inside his sleeves. He wanted to reach out and touch that fur. He fought the urge to tease her. He didn't want to risk Hermione in her cat form lashing out. "There have been cases where animal hair was used by mistake," he said softly, which was true. He had read up on it. "It's not unheard of." Hermione's round eyes, bright and pleading, fixed on him. "It'll go away quickly, won't it?" Loren's tone hardened. "No, it will actually prolong the transformation. Even with a healer's help, it could take nearly a month to recover." Hermione stared at him, eyes growing wide. The three little whiskers at the corners of her mouth trembled as if she might cry. But those were old cases. Madame Pomfrey might have another way. Loren reached out, ostensibly to touch her forehead in comfort. His fingers brushed her skin, then scratched lightly across the fine fur. It was warm and soft, better than he'd imagined, but Hermione hardly felt it. She was still reeling from what he'd said. He led her out, Hermione shrinking behind him as they left the lavatory for the hospital wing. The hospital wing sat on the second floor. They knew the way and arrived quickly. Loren knocked and pushed the door open. The hinges creaked loudly in the quiet. He and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. The door should have been shut. Loren stepped in, holding Hermione's fluffy cat paw, and moved cautiously forward. Inside the ward lay chaos. White sheets were scattered across the floor. Pots and bottles of medicine lay overturned. The beds were empty. The patients gone. On the floor, unsteadily and disheveled, lay Madame Pomfrey, unconscious in her white robes. "Madame Pomfrey! Madame Pomfrey!" They rushed to her side. "Damn it, why is the Slytherin common room so hard to find?" Harry and Ron had gone back to Gryffindor Tower for the invisibility cloak, and now hurried through the dungeon's maze-like corridors trying to locate the Slytherin entrance. 10 minutes passed with no luck. They had not counted on this complication and began to fear their plan would fail. Both leaned against a wall, breathing hard. "If only we could follow a Slytherin back to the common room," Ron muttered. "Goyle's been knocked out. Malfoy's probably inside. Maybe Crabbe will show up." "Without Loren and Hermione, we can't do much," Harry said, frustrated. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. Ron whipped the invisibility cloak out. and slipped inside it. Harry instinctively flattened himself into an invisible Goyle pose and waited. If anyone in the dungeon was going to be here, it would be Slytherins. When the figure stepped from the shadows, Harry stifled a surprised laugh. "Percy, what are you doing here?" Percy's face went from startled to offended. "That's none of your business. You're Goyle, aren't you?" Percy assumed a prefect's stance and snapped. "Go back to your dormitory. It's not safe to be wandering the corridors at night." "You're the one wandering," Harry muttered. "I'm a prefect. Nothing will bother me." Harry decided to play his part. I forgot the common room's location and the password." Percy narrowed his eyes and scrutinized Goyle suspiciously. The piercing look made Harry glad Goyle had a reputation for being dim. After a moment, Percy pointed down the corridor. "Walk that way. Watch the snake patterns on the torch holders. The direction the snake's head faces is the way to the Slytherin common room." Just as Harry moved to thank him, Percy added, "Today's password is glory." Harry felt as if the polyjuice potion had failed him in humiliation, but he nodded, thanked Percy quickly, and hurried away. Once sure they were out of sight, Ron burst from under the cloak and leapt around, delighted. "He even knows the password. He knows the password." "Isn't that something a prefect should know?" Harry asked. "Not Percy," Ron said, grinning. "He must be nosing around about the heir of Slytherin. He might have even snuck into the Slytherin common room." Harry felt relief. Percy hadn't suspected. They hurried on. The Slytherin entrance was hidden in a stone wall between two torch heads. They whispered the password. The stone door slid open, and they slipped inside. The common room was a long, low dungeon, stone walls and ceiling, green lamps dangling from chains. A carved mantelpiece framed a small fire that threw light across the room and picked out Draco Malfoy sitting in a carved chair, reading yesterday's Daily Prophet. The front page showed a smiling photograph of Lucius Malfoy shaking hands with Cornelius Fudge. Harry's eyes skimmed the headline, "Malfoy aids Ministry of Magic again." The article praised Lucius Malfoy and described the House of Malfoy's funding of ministry projects and winter subsidies. Harry's jaw tightened. Lucius Malfoy sat on the Board of Governors. No wonder, he thought, bitterly. It must have been him and Fudge colluding to arrest Hagrid. Draco set the paper down and looked up at Goyle. "Where have you been? Didn't I tell you to stay away from Crabbe? Are you two getting chummy again?" Harry remembered Seamus's comment about Crabbe acting oddly. Apparently even Malfoy and Goyle were avoiding him. Goyle stammered, and Malfoy frowned deeper. Harry didn't want to waste time. He said in a clumsy Goyle voice, "Any news about the Chamber of Secrets?" Malfoy looked uneasy at the abrupt change in subject, but shrugged it off. "It's strange. It's been 2 months and the Daily Prophet still barely mentions it. Dumbledore's trying to cover it up, I think. My father says the school reforms are to remove the board's control. Dumbledore wants more power. First the school, then who knows? Maybe the ministry." Harry thought being minister was not necessarily wrong, but kept his mouth shut. "Who do you reckon the heir is?" he mumbled. At that moment his scar burned painfully. He turned his head and saw Crabbe coming out of the dormitory. Crabbe walked straight past the others and left the room. Harry felt the pain in his forehead ease. Crabbe had been absent from dinner. Now it made sense why he hadn't been seen. Ron, invisible beside him, saw the scar and grabbed Harry's sleeve. "Time's up, let's go," he whispered. Harry's heart leapt. Clutching his stomach, he hissed, "Stomach ache, going to get medicine," and bolted out of the common room. Malfoy called after him, "Keep away from Crabbe," but Harry and Ron were already gone. Once outside the stone wall, Harry had slipped back to his true self. They saw Crabbe vanish around a corner and slowed, listening. "My scar hurt," Harry said quietly. "Whatever he is, it has something to do with you-know-who." Ron peered where Crabbe had gone and rubbed his head. "He doesn't actually have Lord Voldemort living in his head, does he?" "Let's follow and see," Harry said, draping the invisibility cloak over both of them and hurrying after Crabbe. Crabbe wasn't fast. They caught up, but instead of heading for the dungeon exit, he wandered through ground-floor corridors and slipped into a plain-looking lavatory. Harry and Ron crept to the door. Crabbe moved to a sink and, with an absurdly theatrical flourish, pushed back his sleeve. A thin black snake slithered from his cuff and slipped toward the brass tap, hissing, "Open." The tap flashed brilliant white and began to spin. The sink rolled aside, revealing a wide pipe big enough for a person to crawl into. Harry's breath caught. A passage. Crabbe stepped toward it, two floating shapes behind him, stiff as statues. Ron clapped both hands over their mouths. Their eyes nearly popped. It was Colin and Justin, petrified, drifting like ghosts in front of Crabbe. How had they been brought here? Were they dead? Had Crabbe done this? 1,000 questions crowded their minds as they followed silently into the hidden pipe. Crabbe, carrying the petrified Colin and Justin, slipped into the pipe and vanished into the dark passage as if he'd been swallowed by the walls. Harry and Ron stared after him, all the pieces suddenly clicking into place. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was hidden in the sink of the girls' lavatory. That would allow the basilisk to move through Hogwarts by way of the plumbing. Myrtle had encountered it as it came out and been killed. Hermione had brewed polyjuice potion in that very lavatory during the day. Crabbe could have opened the entrance at night to set the monster loose. The chamber had been under their noses the whole time. "We need to tell Dumbledore right now," Ron blurted, face pale. "No. You go," Harry said quietly. "I need to follow him." Ron gaped at him. "Are you mad? There could be a 1,000-year-old basilisk down there." Harry breathed out slowly and looked into the pipe's black throat. "I know, but he took Colin and Justin. I have to follow him, in case they're still alive. I can't let them become the basilisk's meal before anyone arrives." Ron's face flushed with urgency, but he had no better plan. "I'll stall for time," he managed. Harry forced a smile and patted his shoulder. "Run and find a professor as fast as you can. If they don't come, I'll be the basilisk's dessert." He backed up a few steps, planted his hands on the stone rim of the sink, flipped over and dropped into the pipe. Ron wiped his face with his sleeve, choked on a sob, and ran. The inside of the pipe was slick with years of grime and damp, which let Harry slide without fear of cuts. It twisted and plunged steeply down, bumping him at every corner until the world outside the metal tube was only a memory. After what felt like an age of sliding, he shot out of an opening and landed on damp rock. He scrambled up and ran farther into the tunnel, heart pounding, desperate to catch up. He soon spotted Crabbe ahead, moving slowly with two stiff, floating bodies slung over his arms. Crabbe's voice echoed in the cavernous silence. "I didn't even eat to bring these out. Will the ritual you told me about really let me take knowledge directly? Make me powerful?" Harry crept closer, eyes narrowed. The question was answered by a thin black snake that crawled from Crabbe's collar, slithered up and settled on his shoulder, then spoke in a dry rasp that was almost human. "Of course, a Horcrux holds magic beyond your imagining. By merging our souls, you will gain my knowledge, master the magic I know." At the sound, Harry's stride faltered. The scar at his temple flared and stung. Horcrux, soul fusion. Why did that voice make his scar burn? Was Voldemort in that snake? He suppressed the questions and kept following. A huge shed skin lay coiled across the path, shimmering a vivid, poisonous green. From its size, Harry guessed the animal that shed it had been at least 20 feet long. His stomach dropped. He silently prayed Ron would bring help soon. Even if the basilisk wasn't waiting to swallow him whole, Harry could be nothing more than a morsel to be picked out of its teeth. The thin snake lifted its head and hissed a single word that Harry somehow understood. "Open." A solid stone wall parted as if hearing Parseltongue. They stepped into a long, dim chamber. Stone pillars carved with interlaced serpents rose and dissolved into darkness, casting long shadows across a floor shrouded in a faint green mist. The thin snake, perched near Crabbe, resumed its lesson. "Most ordinary folk call Horcruxes evil and taboo," it whispered. "They do not understand them. It is through killing that a soul may be rent. A fragment can then be sealed in an object outside the body. Even if the body is destroyed, the soul persists. A piece remains in the world." The words were like a devil's whisper in the cavern. Harry's mind churned. Suddenly, Voldemort's impossible survival made bitter sense. Crabbe's voice, small and eager, asked, "So I'd get your knowledge? Your magic?" The snake's tongue flicked at Crabbe's ear. "I will place a piece of my soul within you. Through that connection, you will know what I know." A cold realization slithered through Harry. It was a trick, a promise of power to bind a servant. Voldemort wanted an obedient puppet who would accept a fragment of his soul. Crabbe, breathless with greed, dragged the two motionless bodies to the base of a towering Slytherin statue and threw them at its feet. The statue's face was old and simian, its beard long and sparse, its robes carved in stone. "You kill one of them," the snake instructed. Then a voice rang through the chamber, bright and utterly out of place. "Stop this evil. The righteous Lockhart will never allow you to do this." The sound cut the air like a spoon on a teacup. Lockhart's footsteps echoed loudly as he strode forward, wand in hand, his showy shoes clacking. Crabbe and the snake turned. Harry's heart lurched. Behind Lockhart, Ron came panting, legs trembling from the sprint. "How did you get Lockhart? Where are the others?" Harry demanded, cold dread settling in his core. "The others? I couldn't find them," Ron panted. "None of the professors were in their offices. I had to find someone. Anyone." Half an hour earlier, Ron had run like his feet might give out any second. Sweat matting his red hair, he had raced from office to office. Dumbledore's office, but he didn't know the password. Professor McGonagall's office empty. Professor Flitwick gone. Snape not in his dungeon. Desperate, he had stumbled into Gilderoy Lockhart's office and burst out the story. Lockhart had been mid-letter to Rita Skeeter, quill poised, but at the mention of adventure, his eyes had gleamed. The mirror by his door reflected a candle whose flame swayed, and Lockhart, head bent, had pictured the perfect chapter for his next book: bravery, fame, adoration. The thought curled round him and tempted. He considered Crabbe's performance in the dueling club, how he'd seemed harmless, and convinced himself he could deal with whatever monster lurked below. "As a professor," he told himself, "I must ensure the safety of my students." He stood, seized his wand, and left in a flourish, and Ron, out of breath and out of options, had followed. Back in the chamber, Lockhart swept forward and, without pause, flicked his wand. "Obliviate!" A colorless, formless charm flowed from his wand. The snake responded with a low, hissing sound. Then it opened its mouth and unleashed a cloud of gray smoke braided with something like a memory charm. The force slammed into Lockhart, sent him reeling into a pillar and knocked him out cold. Harry shot a look at Ron. "You should have found Loren," he said wryly. "I was trying to find a professor fast. I didn't think of him," Ron groaned. In the hospital wing earlier, Hermione and Loren had been tending to Madame Pomfrey, who still needed time to recover after whatever had struck her, when Hermione's ears, the soft, unmistakable cat-like ones she sometimes displayed, had flattened in worry. Bloody Mary's mirror had begun to heat. The illusion on Lockhart had been triggered. Loren had kissed Hermione's fluffy head and promised to go alert the staff. He'd gone to the monster statue, trying a string of candy names until the wall slowly opened, and then rushed straight to Dumbledore's office to shout that Harry had entered the chamber. Professors had turned to look. They'd been aware, but somehow, for reasons that now mattered terribly, they had not yet arrived in time. Now, in the chamber, Crabbe stood trembling with greed and fear. The thin snake continued to crawl and whisper, its words slick with temptation. Harry's scar burned with warnings. The green mist curled, and the carved serpents watched. The clock was running down. Headmaster's office. "Chamber of Secrets, Basilisk!" Professor Sprout cried out. Professor Snape could no longer sit still. He rose and hurried straight to Loren, grabbed his robes and barked, "Lead the way!" Loren, still bewildered, was hauled out before he could explain. The other professors sprang up and fell in beside them. Dumbledore lingered for a moment, then slowly rose and looked to the gilded perch. Fawkes, newly reborn and not yet fully feathered, cocked his head and gave a small flap. Once the other professors had left, Dumbledore gently tapped the phoenix's beak and murmured in a voice only Fawkes could hear, "Go, but keep them safe." Fawkes looked at him, gave a soft cry, spread its wings, and rose in a flare of red flame, vanishing from the perch. Only then did Dumbledore move to join the group. "How could you have gone into the Chamber of Secrets on your own? You should have told a professor." Professor Flitwick squeaked, his little legs nearly flying. Professor McGonagall's face was tight with anger, though she knew this was no time for a long lecture. Dumbledore opened his mouth, trying to smooth things over, but McGonagall's sharp glance cut him off. He turned to Loren helplessly. "Loren, tell us. What happened?" Loren's steps faltered. He wasn't entirely sure of the details himself. The illusion left on Lockhart had been triggered. Harry and Ron had been gone too long. Those facts were what led him to believe they had entered the chamber. If they had been searching for its entrance, they would have acted cautiously. Running in on their own suggested an emergency. He had come to the headmaster's office to inform Dumbledore and to get help. He swallowed. "We'll explain on the way. We need to hurry. Rescue Harry." Snape pursed his lips and shot Loren a quick look. Noting Dumbledore's unhurried manner behind them, Snape's grip loosened. No one spoke for a moment. Then the group moved swiftly to Myrtle's bathroom and to the entrance to the chamber. "I'll go first," Flitwick declared, tapping his wand and darting into the pipe so fast he left an afterimage. Worried the basilisk might be guarding below, he wanted to scout ahead. Snape gave no announcement. He simply propulsed himself into the pipe next, cloak snapping. McGonagall nodded at Dumbledore, lifted her skirts, and flew down. Professor Sprout hesitated at the top. Dumbledore stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. "Pomona, you stay here. We'll need someone above as our contact." Sprout tightened her wand in both hands, hesitated, then nodded. Dumbledore and Loren vanished together down the shaft. When they landed on the damp stone, the other three professors had already formed a cautious advance. With Dumbledore beside him, Loren felt safer and matched their pace. The tunnel was like a vast tomb, damp stone, bones of small creatures strewn about. Water dripped now and then with a soft plink. As they rounded a bend, Snape caught sight of something blocking the passage and slowed. "Careful," he warned. They raised their wands, but there was no sign of Harry or Ron. None of them wished to act rashly and risk setting something off. They moved forward slowly, weapons ready. Loren leaned close to Dumbledore. "Shouldn't we warn them?" Dumbledore gave an innocent, puzzled look. "Warn them about what?" Loren forced a smile and kept up the act. The professors drew nearer to the obstacle. Flitwick was the first to blurt, "It doesn't seem to be alive." Snape shot forward and called back, "It's shed skin, the basilisks." They clustered around the enormous cast-off scales. Snape's voice trembled with a tight excitement. "At least 20 feet long. The magic in this hasn't faded in years. If you replace African tree snake skin, the rest of his technical potion jargon washed over the others." Flitwick poked at a scale larger than himself. It was as hard as metal, and he stared in awe. "I never imagined there was such a creature in Hogwarts," he exclaimed. "So many students. Good heavens. Salazar Slytherin." McGonagall's jaw tightened. If Slytherin had not been one of the founders, she would have sworn. Loren stood just beyond them, looking composed and pretending ignorance. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "Let us move on. Potter and Weasley are still waiting." The three professors snapped out of their surprise and moved on, determined. Before Salazar Slytherin's statue, Crabbe watched as Lockhart was blasted away, a small, hungry glint of triumph in his eye. He turned to Harry and Ron and sneered, "Look who it is. St. Potter and his friends. You've come to save these two Muggleborns, haven't you?" he taunted. "Too bad. You're all going to die with them." He practically hissed with excitement. "And those other Muggleborns, Morgan and Granger, and that pure-blood traitor Longbottom, I'll kill you one by one." Lord Voldemort ignored his chatter and sent the thin snake slithering out, arching toward Harry. "Harry Potter, we meet again." Harry felt his scar burn. The snake's gaze was poisonous and intent, but he did not flinch. Under that cold pressure, his thoughts sped unnaturally fast. Venomous snake, Parseltongue, Basilisk, Chamber of Secrets, Myrtle, Hagrid accused, stammering Hagrid. A flash of insight snapped everything into place. "Tom Riddle," Harry cried. "You're Tom Riddle." Ron's eyes widened as he stared at the thin snake between them. A harsh laugh came from its mouth. Voldemort coiled around Crabbe's arm, making him wave his wand. Letters, faint and shimmering, formed in the air. Tom Marvolo Riddle. "This was the name I used at Hogwarts," Lord Voldemort said. "But know this, Salazar Slytherin's blood runs through me, passed down through his descendant's daughter. Would I keep the name of that wretched Muggle father? He abandoned me before I was born when he discovered his wife was a witch." Ron's heart thudded. He had never imagined Voldemort's origins like that. Half orphan, half noble blood, raised with such resentment. Harry stared at him, stunned. This man had been an orphan once, and had made many more orphans out of others. "My foolish Muggle father paid the price for that," Voldemort continued, showing no real emotion. "And I am past present, and future. He let his wand trace the letters anew, and they rearranged themselves into an even colder statement. I am Lord Voldemort. The professors hidden behind the stone pillars at the entrance had a range of expressions: doubt, surprise. Dumbledore had told them to hide and watch. Despite every instinct to rush out and protect the students, they trusted his judgment. Flitwick swallowed his worry. He trusted Dumbledore absolutely. Snape shot Loren a long, appraising look and sneered softly. McGonagall's eyebrows shook with anger. But as realization dawned that this was all within Dumbledore's plan, her outrage was tinged with a grim reassurance. Voldemort's voice went on. 50 years ago you killed Myrtle and framed Hagrid, Ron shouted. It was I, Voldemort said. It was I who exposed Hagrid. He turned his sharp gaze around the chamber. Picture it from the perspective of Professor Armando Dippet. Here was Tom Riddle, humble in origin, yes, orphaned, but brilliant, a prefect, a model student. At the word humble, the professors glanced at Loren. The description sounded familiar. Loren spread his hands and blinked innocently. Why are you looking at me? Snape's snort was dry, to see if he grows up to be a third Dark Lord. Flitwick smiled wryly, obviously a joke. McGonagall's stern face softened at the corner of her mouth. Loren bristled. What does that have to do with me? My family isn't humble. Grandpa Bates was rich. Dumbledore's gaze drifted to the unconscious Lockhart, and he sighed softly. He had missed something important, it seemed. Voldemort continued without pause. Hagrid was convenient, clumsy, always causing trouble. He kept beasts under his care and told tall tales. I did not expect things to go as smoothly as they did. It took me 5 years to uncover the chamber's secrets and the hidden entrance. Hagrid doesn't have that mind. You'd think Dumbledore saw through you, Harry ground out. He did, Voldemort said coolly. He watched me and distrusted me from the start. That was inconvenient. I learned of Salazar Slytherin's work here, of the things he left behind, and I took them further. I did not care for the ignorant morals that bound my ancestor. I wanted the truth, the essence of magic. I followed that path, and I did not let years of searching be wasted. I left a diary, preserved the memories of my 16-year-old self in it. Harry's voice was a small, stunned whisper. A Horcrux? Yes. Voldemort's words were flat. The basilisk killed Myrtle, and in the rip of my soul, it split. I preserved a part of my 16-year-old self in that diary. In time, by chance or by my design, I hoped someone would follow my path and finish Salazar Slytherin's work. Ron looked at Crabbe with a sneer. And that's the person you chose? He picked up the diary? I'd have thought Malfoy would be more suitable. The thin snake flicked its tongue. A clumsy attempt at divination, Voldemort sneered. Malfoy's circumstances were favorable, but his father, Lucius, is cunning. The rest of the sentence trailed off, lost to the chamber. The snake tightened its coils around Crabbe's arm. Alas, the diary was destroyed. I suspect your friend, Loren Morgan, may have been responsible. Harry tried to crow triumphantly. That's good. Your plans are finished. The basilisk's attacks will fail. No one else will die. They will die soon, Voldemort interrupted. Before he finished, Crabbe lunged. 2 bat bogey hexes shot from him, aimed at Harry and Ron. Both boys darted aside. The battle erupted under Salazar Slytherin's statue. Crabbe had opened himself to Voldemort's influence and accepted magical modifications that made him stronger. But Harry and Ron were not helpless either. Their repeated trials, trolls, Quirrell, the Acromantula, had tempered them, and their teamwork was tight. They split up to flank Crabbe. Ron held the defense while Harry struck. A well-timed Expelliarmus from Harry smashed Crabbe backwards. Crabbe went down at the statue's base, his wand flying from his hand. Harry and Ron exhaled, but stayed alert. The thin snake hissed and spat a gray mist toward them. It moved slowly. Both boys flicked their wands. Ron transfigured a stone slab to block the mist, while Harry cast a forceful Expelliarmus. They ran apart as they cast, keeping the barrier between them and the fog. Voldemort's power in this form seemed surprisingly limited. The stone shattered the mist. Harry's crimson Expelliarmus drove into the snake and ripped at its scales. The serpent was blasted back, nearly stripped of skin. Harry and Ron exchanged a brief, relieved grin. Chapter 12, the first 7-page picture, Snake Swallowing Snake. The thin snake, inhabited by Lord Voldemort, lay limp on the cold stone floor, pain radiating from the base of every scale. the muscles beneath spasming uncontrollably. In his spectral state, he could still use slivers of soul magic, the kind that reached into memory. That fool Lockhart had just cast a memory charm that probed the deeper parts of the soul. Exactly the sort of thing Voldemort could exploit with a single breath. Against ordinary spells, however, he felt helpless. A stray Expelliarmus from a second year had nearly made him wish for death in that moment. He was grateful he had not sought out those who pretended to be his loyal servants. Otherwise, this flicker of a spirit, barely clinging to life, might have been trapped in a glass jar by their family's dark arts and interrogated until it yielded every secret. Feeling the snake's body weaken further, Voldemort forced the twitching muscles to flip him over again. Power, power. Only overwhelming power counted for anything. The thin snake crawled to the base of Salazar Slytherin's enormous stone statue and looked up, hissing, "Speak to me, Slytherin, the greatest of the 4 founders of Hogwarts." Under every eye in the Chamber of Secrets, the statue's face began to move. Its stone mouth opened wider and wider until it became a huge black void, and something colossal stirred inside. From that yawning maw, a gigantic creature slithered, emerging with a rustling, bone-deep sound. Its tail lashed, striking the stone slabs with thunderous impact. The whole chamber seemed to shudder. Professor McGonagall crouched behind a pillar, horror stiffening her. She raised her wand, ready to rush forward and throw herself between the thing and her students, but Dumbledore reached out and held her back, shaking his head. McGonagall glared at him, then at the 2 young wizards facing the basilisk, and for a moment her hand tightened on Dumbledore's sleeve. Years of trust kept her from throwing him aside. She tore her hand away angrily, her feet rooted to the floor, while the Transfiguration Professor gripped her wand so tightly it could have leapt from her fingers at any second. A chill rose from the stone at Slytherin's feet and climbed their legs. It crept into their hearts. Harry and Ron felt their bodies seize. At the sight of the basilisk's silhouette, they squeezed their eyes shut as if that would save them. They remembered only too well that a direct look was fatal. How many Ron Weasleys and Harry Potters do you think it would take to fill that stomach? Ron muttered miserably, his knees shaking. A quick glance had shown him the creature was even larger than the shed skin outside. Harry's heart hammered. He inhaled, trying to find words, but the press of darkness and the sound of the thing crawling amplified the panic. "Save us! Save us! Someone, anyone!" Ron babbled. Then a clear cry rang out, and, reluctantly, they opened their eyes to slits of vision. Warm flames flickered around Fawkes. The basilisk was a deep, poisonous green, its body as thick as an oak trunk. Fawkes, newly reborn and still pinpricked with stubble where his feathers had yet to regrow, moved with remarkable swiftness, wheeling about the monster's head. Behind the pillar, McGonagall shot Dumbledore a resentful look, but the sense of dread eased. Snape watched with inscrutable eyes. Flitwick peered over his shoulder, wanting to speak but holding back. Loren smiled faintly, amused, observing Dumbledore's poker-faced intensity as if the old headmaster were a curious piece on a board. Fawkes struck the basilisk's eyes with beak and talon. Harry and Ron dodged its lashes and thrashes, slowly driven back. When the 2 had nowhere left to go, the sorting hat dropped into Harry's hands as if by its own will. Harry drew the sword of Gryffindor and lunged, driving it up into the snake's upper jaw at the precise moment one of the fangs tore into his arm. The basilisk writhed, rolled back toward the statue, and the tooth snapped off and remained embedded in Harry's flesh. Crabbe, who had been cowering nearby behind the thin snake that sheltered Voldemort, stumbled forward and laughed like a fool. The famous Harry Potter's finished. He challenged the Dark Lord, and now he's fallen at the Dark Lord's hands. Harry, soon you'll meet your Muggle mother. No one paid him any mind. Harry lay on the floor as a hot, now spreading pain crawled from the wound through his body. His vision blurred, the chamber dissolved into a whirl of dim colors. "Harry, Harry!" Ron sobbed, clutching the long fangs still lodged in Harry's arm, but even he knew it was probably too late. He held Harry close and wept, warm drops soaking into Harry's sleeve. Fawkes landed beside them and pressed his head against Harry's wound. Pearl-like tears slid from his smooth feathers and fell into the cut, shining as they struck it. "Get away, you broken bird! Get off him, do you hear me? Get away!" Crabbe's impotent shouting echoed through the empty chamber, ridiculous as a clown on a stage. Voldemort watched from a short distance. He knew Phoenix tears healed. He made no move to stop them. He had expected as much. He had also long understood that in his weakened state inside a small host, he could not kill Harry Potter while Hogwarts remained under Dumbledore's protection. Killing Harry had never been his primary aim tonight anyway. Creating a living Horcrux had only been an afterthought. Instead, he had come for knowledge. He slithered toward the dying basilisk. At the base of the statue, the thin snake that housed him, tiny, not even the size of one of the basilisk's scales, huddled against the great beast like a maggot and hissed, "Open for me. Sept me. You are dying. I will carry on Slytherin's work." The basilisk's struggles weakened. Blind now, it still angled its head toward the statue out of some deep animal urge. One last look at Salazar Slytherin, its master. It vaguely remembered that its master had not always been that carved, haughty likeness. The founder had once been a polished nobleman, handsome and formal. Later, he had fallen to strange experiments, changed himself until his face had grown sharp and monkey-like. He fed the basilisk mice and spiders, never letting it forage or leave the chamber. The restrictions baffled the creature. The master had never spoken of an heir explicitly, but when it heard Parseltongue, it obeyed, because the language itself compelled it. In the thick, unseeing dark, the creature thought it saw that solitary figure, and a twinge of grievance rose up. "Why do you come only now? I've slept so long." At last the great body stilled. Its mighty frame stopped breathing. Only Loren, guided by an odd premonition, glanced toward the two snakes, and his eyes widened as if struck by lightning. One snake was opening its mouth to swallow another. Two serpents facing each other, one consuming the other, with tall stone pillars behind them that, for an instant, looked like a staff. The image matched the pattern on the first 7 pages of a certain mysterious book. A prophecy that had lain across ages was unfolding in front of him. All of this had been arranged for this moment. As Voldemort's thin spirit burrowed into the basilisk's mouth, an eerie mist coalesced around the smaller snake and flowed up toward the giant's head. In an imperceptible plane, the parasite of a soul slipped into the basilisk's spirit. That was the prize. The basilisk, Slytherin's monster, had carried inside it the research and memories of Salazar Slytherin, notes on ancient magics, fragments of theory, scenes of experiments from 1,000 years ago. The creature could not understand such things. It had only retained the images and sounds as deep-seated memories. To everyone else, however, they were Slytherin's most precious legacy, preserved in the beast's soul. Voldemort had once considered making the basilisk into a Horcrux to forge a lasting link and read those memories, but a living Horcrux had no precedent and no guarantee of success. In his weakened, spectral form, he could instead force himself into the basilisk's dying soul and seize those deep memories outright. For that to work, the creature had to be dying. Using the last of its strength, the basilisk twisted to face the statue. It had nothing left. Its jaw slumped, and it opened its mouth faintly. Take it all," it breathed. Voldemort plunged his spirit into the gullet. In the same instant, the basilisk's massive, glassy eyes rolled back. Its body slackened, and the huge snake stopped moving. From within its corpse, a black specter flared and shot out of the chamber, vanishing into the shadows beyond. Loren, who remembered seeing something similar the year before when he had faced Quirrell, was stunned. He blinked at the empty place the specter had been and muttered, "Lord Voldemort, he just ran away?" A millennia-spanning prophecy recorded in the Book of Abraham involving Slytherin, and now this. 2 snakes, one swallowing the other. He had expected Voldemort to be doing something to bind the basilisk or to mutate it beyond reason. Instead, the dark presence had fled, leaving a dead monster and a dozen stunned young wizards. No one except Loren had noticed his strange reaction. The others were focused on Harry and the Phoenix. The warmth spreading from Fawkes's tears chased the poison from Harry's blood and eased the pain. Sight and hearing crept back to him. Ron's hiccuping sobs and Crabbe's distant jeers battered at his head. Harry opened his eyes slowly and met Ron's tear-streaked, snotty face. A long, sticky strand hung from Ron's nose, almost touching Harry's cheek. Harry turned his head to hide a grin. "You were disgusted with me, weren't you?" Ron sniffed, offended and smiling at once. Harry stroked Fox's head. The bird's stubbly feathers were prickly under his fingers. He pushed himself up. No, you just imagine things. Who am I crying for, if not myself? Ron muttered, trying to sound stoic while failing miserably. Crabbe's voice from the far end of the chamber rose in fury, hoarse and useless. Why aren't you dead? Why aren't you dead yet? Harry and Ron exchanged a look and then rose, wands at the ready, and advanced. Crabbe's curses faltered. He fumbled, looked around for help. Dark Lord, Dark Lord. Before he could finish, a black wisp had already escaped from the basilisk's carcass and disappeared. Loren watched, bewildered, and then the reality of the scene settled. The basilisk was dead, Voldemort had fled, and the immediate danger had passed. Professor McGonagall could no longer restrain herself. She strode out from behind the pillar and cried, Potter! Weasley! Hospital wing. Curtains were drawn around a single bed, screening the patient from the rest of the room as if they did not want anyone to see. A large blanket covered the mattress, with a prominent hump in the middle where the patient lay. A fluffy cat ear poked out from under the blanket and twitched occasionally. Its owner was listening intently to the conversations next door. Madame Pomfrey had set up the curtained cubicle to spare Hermione the embarrassment of being seen in her current condition. No one else knew she had been transformed. Loren was hiding in the small space as well, watching the constantly wiggling ear with a mischievous expression. He could not resist pinching it. Humph! Hermione growled from under the blanket, tensing all over, her ears flushed hot. With a reddened face, she bit her lip, judged where the hand was, and, with a quick, cat-like straight punch, struck squarely at the intruder's chest. He coughed twice-eyed as if the blow had taken him by surprise. Loren clutched his chest theatrically and chuckled. I only touched it by accident, honest. A muffled voice came from under the blanket. Don't talk. Don't stop me from listening to the news. Outside the curtained cubicle, Justin and Colin lay on beds, strapped to boards, and looking remarkably composed despite everything that had happened. Lockhart still lay unconscious nearby. Snape was not in the hospital wing. He had gone down to his dungeons to dissect the basilisk and process the materials he'd recovered. Dumbledore had gone out to deal with Crabbe. Professor Sprout had cornered Professor Flitwick, gossiping about the scene. Lord Voldemort spat out a blast that sent Lockhart flying, basilisk, and a sword. Professor Flitwick recounted excitedly. Oh, really? So, Slytherin. Pomona Sprout's face lit up at the scandalous details. She was rueful that she'd stayed away. Had she known that the whole affair would be so spectacular and far less dangerous than feared, she would have insisted on watching in person. Harry and Ron were on two adjacent beds, being tended to by Madame Pomfrey as she set bones and smoothed out bruises. Professor McGonagall's bun was slightly disordered, her expression a mixture of anger and relief. She watched Madame Pomfrey's movements closely. Poppy, are you quite all right? She asked. They had heard that Madame Pomfrey had been stunned. McGonagall worried that the healer might not be fit to treat others. I was only grazed by a stupefy, Pomfrey protested indignantly. Mr. Morgan's countercurse was perfectly placed. I'm fine. Madame Pomfrey was still indignant about being attacked at all. A healer never expected to be ambushed in peacetime. She reserved most of her wrath for the name Lord Voldemort and for Crabbe. She rotated Harry's arm, feeling the set of bone and muscle. How does that feel? Any pain? Harry flexed his arm carefully. A little stiff. That's all. That's to be expected, Pomfrey said. It was a deep wound. It'll need time. Thankfully, Fawkes cleared the basilisk venom from your system quickly. Just then, Dumbledore entered, his long robe and purple cloak trailing slightly, his boots fastened with buckles. He looked as if he had returned from a long journey. Ah, he said, smiling behind his half-moon spectacles. Good news meets me at the door. It seems the Phoenix's rebirth has not diminished Fawkes's magic. Dumbledore made a point of averting his gaze from Professor McGonagall, perhaps hoping to avoid a scolding. Headmaster Dumbledore, Harry and Ron said together. Ah, Professor Flitwick and Sprout rose from their whispering and gathered at the bed. When visiting patients, one should always bring something, Dumbledore said, setting a small basket of treats on the table at the foot of the bed. He pulled up a stool and sat, then added, And I have some good news. What news? Ron asked impatiently. Vincent Crabbe has been given into the custody of an Auror friend at the Ministry, Dumbledore replied, chuckling. The evidence is sufficient. They assure me Hagrid will be back at Hogwarts in time for Christmas. That's brilliant, Harry said. Dumbledore's gaze softened as he looked at the two boys. Now, I should like to hear precisely how you discovered the Chamber of Secrets and found Lord Voldemort. That's what we were wondering as well, McGonagall said, still a little shaken. Harry and Ron exchanged a quick look, hesitated, and then began to relate the tale from the beginning. With the help of friends and Parseltongue, Harry had confirmed the monster in the Chamber of Secrets was a basilisk. A mysterious note had sent them to Hagrid's hut. Hagrid's hint led them into the Forbidden Forest to question Aragog. From Aragog, they learned that the basilisk moved through the pipes. Only then did Harry realize in dismay, the pipes, the lavatory. Myrtle had been killed in the lavatory. The entrance had to be there. Excellent, McGonagall said. So you discovered how the basilisk moved, though you did break over 100 school rules in the process. But what happened next? How did you find Lord Voldemort and Crabbe, and how did you end up in the chamber? Hermione, curled under her blanket with her cat ears drooping, heard everything. She was an accomplice, perhaps the main culprit, and though McGonagall wasn't addressing her directly, Hermione felt the rebuke as keenly as if it had been aimed at her. The disappointment lasted only as long as Loren's fingers continued to fuss with her ear. Sensing that, Hermione's annoyance evaporated, and she struck again with a small, sharp paw. Hey, you missed! Loren teased from outside the curtain. Hermione's fist tightened under the blanket. Harry went on. They'd brewed Polyjuice Potion for a month and used it to get into the Slytherin common room. They'd tried to learn what Malfoy knew, but fate led them instead to Crabbe, and from there they discovered that Colin and Justin had been taken. Ron added, sounding wounded, I couldn't find the password to the headmaster's office. I ran from professor to professor and only found Lockhart awake, so I took him along to chase after Harry. The professors were astonished. Who could have guessed that a holiday staff meeting had nearly missed such an event? Dumbledore had called the heads together after Hagrid's arrest to discuss finances and to prepare them for possible inquiries from the board. Harry, his impatience reignited, suddenly thumped the blanket with a wince. Why could someone like Lockhart become a professor? Facing Lord Voldemort had been terrifying. When Lockhart had strode forward, wand raised, Harry had felt fleeting hope until Lockhart had been promptly dispatched. What sort of colleague was this? What sort of teacher? Ron muttered. He seemed thick sometimes, but he wrote so many amazing things in his books. Mum adored him. I thought he'd be useful. Books can be faked, Dumbledore said quietly. He gave Loren, still half hidden behind the curtain, a meaningful look before turning to the sleeping Lockhart. People prefer to believe a handsome young wizard with a charming smile than an old wizard who chased werewolves or a crone who outran a banshee. Sprout, who had suspected as much, covered her mouth at Dumbledore's explanation. So he took credit for other people's work? More than that, Pomona. He found those heroes, learned exactly what they'd done and how they'd done it, and then erased their memories with memory charms. He stole their adventures for himself. Dumbledore's voice was matter of fact. Harry and Ron looked at the inert Lockhart in disgust. But, Headmaster, how do you know? And if you already knew what he was, why did you make him a professor? Dumbledore answered evenly. I know 2 wizards whose memories he stole. When you've been at this for a long time, you have acquaintances in many places. He smiled faintly. Besides, in a school environment, his fraud would soon be exposed by the students' honesty. Children learn as much from a poor teacher about what not to do as from a good one. Madame Pomfrey glanced at the still unconscious Lockhart. She added, calmly but firmly, he was hit by a memory charm, and Lord Voldemort's magic interfered with it. The 2 magics have muddled his mind terribly. That's beyond what I can treat here. He must go to St. Mungo's. They all thought the same thing. Lockhart was reaping what he had sown. Dumbledore alone watched Loren with a look that was hard to read. The whole episode had a trace of orchestration about it. Lockhart's sudden appearance in the chamber, how events had folded together, and a small, unfamiliar tug of unease ran through the old headmaster. They did not repeat for Dumbledore the details of what had happened later in the chamber. There was no need. Only Professor Sprout lingered on every dramatic point, internally shrieking with curiosity that no one indulged. Eventually, the professors had duties to return to: McGonagall to answer anxious letters from parents, Flitwick to fuss over Christmas decorations, Sprout to nurse her disappointment at having missed the spectacle. Harry and Ron, though protesting that they weren't badly hurt, were persuaded by Madame Pomfrey and McGonagall to remain under care a while longer. "Loren, I should like a word with you," Dumbledore said as he rose, noting the boy's preoccupation petting the cat. Loren had expected to be asked for more details, but the walk to the headmaster's office was quiet. Inside, silver instruments whirred on the desk and gave off thin curls of smoke. Fawkes rested on a gilded perch, ruffling his feathers in a doze. The walls were covered with the portraits of former headmasters. Their snoring stilled as footsteps approached, and they stirred to appraising glances. "Ah! It's that boy again!" one portrait called out with a cackle. Dumbledore shrugged out of his cloak, hung it upon the perch, and sat behind his desk. Before he could speak, he waved his wand and flipped the portraits over so the old headmasters could not interrupt, a small precaution born of experience. "Lockhart's appearance in the chamber was your arrangement," said a voice without ripple. Dumbledore's eyes were serious. He did not relish punishing his pupils, yet he was troubled by a pattern of calculated influence that had drawn Lockhart, Lord Voldemort, and the two boys into a single encounter. Loren answered softly. His manuscripts had references to Grandpa Bates, and he was planning to visit another best-selling author for Christmas. I couldn't let that information spread. Dumbledore had suspected this and felt a small relief at the motive. It showed Loren's concern for family. "How did you make him go?" "Remember the unicorn horn," Loren said. "I used it to repair an old mirror, a mirror that reflects into a person's consciousness. Lockhart's vanity and hunger for fame are his weaknesses. I set up an illusion that played to those weaknesses. When he encountered anything connected with the Chamber of Secrets, he would step forward willingly, driven by his need for glory. He said it plainly and without flinching. He would accept Dumbledore's reprimand if it came. Hearing that it wasn't an imperious curse eased Dumbledore's mind somewhat, but another concern remained. So he went in of his own accord, stupidly facing Lord Voldemort on his own? Loren blinked. Otherwise, Dumbledore's expression softened and then grew grave. He saw in the black-haired, black-eyed boy both extraordinary gifts and, in equal measure, dangerous inclinations. Loren's talent for subtle influence, not by precise calculation, but by nudging events along with a particular instinct, had produced an almost flawless result. The old headmaster admired the child's abilities, and yet feared what they might become if left unchecked. He sighed and took from a drawer a fat bundle of papers. "All of Lockhart's manuscripts are here. Take them." Loren's face brightened. He glanced at Dumbledore as if to ask silently, "That's all?" The headmaster nodded faintly. "Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore," Loren said, and pocketed the papers. He was about to leave when Dumbledore's voice stopped him. "When Madame Pomfrey takes Lockhart to St. Mungo's," the headmaster said, "you will accompany them and tell me what they find when you return." After tossing Lockhart's manuscript into the fire and watching it burn to ash, Loren walked back to the hospital wing with a large canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Madame Pomfrey gave him a sour look, but since he'd saved her earlier, she let him in without argument. He pulled out chocolate frogs, licorice wands, and a generous supply of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, practical and entertaining, and handed them to Harry and Ron. With a chocolate frog stuck in his mouth, Ron asked, curious, "So what exactly went wrong with Hermione's polyjuice potion?" Harry was waiting quietly for the answer. From inside the cubicle came an indignant, muffled, "Don't you dare say it!" Loren laughed and waved the question aside as he stepped through the curtain with his bag. Hermione ducked further under her blanket the instant she heard him. In her hurry, she'd left her tail outside the covers. She tried to pull it in and control her body, but the thin cat tail refused to cooperate and swung back and forth. She extended a fluffy paw and dragged the disobedient tail inside. Loren only chuckled. He didn't make any jokes about it. Instead, he took books and notebooks from the bag and stacked them neatly on the bedside table. "I missed all the Transfiguration Club notes," he said lightly. "I'll be freeloading off you during the Christmas holidays. You not going to hide from me forever?" A muffled, soft voice from under the blankets. "No freeloading." "Then do you want to see me fail the exam?" Loren teased, pretending to be hurt. "Are you going to learn animagus by yourself? It's your fault for not taking notes." "I've already seen it. Why are you even saying that?" Hermione's blanket stiffened in mock indignation. "Don't you dare say!" Loren pushed her a little farther, and Hermione answered with a few feisty, muffled cat punches before subsiding. The ward settled into a quieter rhythm. After a day of shocks and surprises, the adrenaline drained from Harry and Ron, leaving them thoughtful. Lying on his bed and staring up at the ceiling, Ron went on. "Don't you think something's odd about the basilisk? 50 years ago, it came out and killed Myrtle right away. This time it's been in the school for months and it hasn't killed a single cat." He waved his hands, animated. "Every time there's a different reason. Madame Norris saw it in a puddle, Colin saw it through his camera, Justin saw it on Nearly Headless Nick, and all those are just reflections and images. It's too many coincidences. If it happened once, fine, but 3 times in a row." Loren tapped a book and frowned. If Dumbledore hadn't been manipulating things, why would he be testing the basilisk's eyesight like that? Still, the monthly dueling practice against the basilisk had given him a lot of experience applying transfiguration in combat. Dealing with large magical beasts would be easier now, if only the basilisk's eyes hadn't been blinded by Fawkes. Loren had hoped to harvest some of the yellow magic from those petrifying eyes. Pity they'd been ruined. Harry sat up, equally puzzled. "And Crabbe, did you notice how weird he was? Malfoy kept telling Goyle to stay away from him." The Slytherins noticed. Even Seamus heard something. "I can't believe none of the professors saw it." "This morning we got a note from Dumbledore," Ron added. "He hinted we could get help from the centaurs. Then Fawkes shows up, and the Sword of Gryffindor appears. It's like someone's nudging things along." Harry thought back over the day in the Forbidden Forest and the Chamber of Secrets and said slowly, "I think Dumbledore knows more than he lets on. He's been encouraging and helping us, teaching us in ways we don't understand. Last term, he put me in front of Voldemort on purpose." Loren nodded. "There's a reason he's been letting things happen. You were the one who made Voldemort fall the first time. Because of Horcruxes, Voldemort won't die outright. He'll come back. Who do you think he'll want to deal with when he returns?" Hermione's cat ears, yellow-furred, peeked out from under the cover, swiveling to listen. Harry pointed at himself, incredulous. "But isn't Dumbledore Voldemort's greatest enemy?" Ron blinked. "That doesn't conflict with training you to fight him, does it? You're the one Voldemort hates the most." Harry felt his throat tighten at the weight of that. "So Dumbledore's letting us do this. He's training us to face Voldemort." Hermione couldn't stay quiet any longer. Her head popped free of the blanket, and she glared at Loren. Remembering the brief warmth she'd felt after wielding the sword, she asked, "Harry, do you feel stronger after using the sword?" Harry flexed his fingers and checked himself, then answered, a little disappointed, "No, I don't feel anything different." "How could that be? I was hoping for." Ron started. "Maybe I don't have the courage yet. Dumbledore said only someone truly recognized by Gryffindor would receive a gift." Loren was more philosophical. He listened, then said quietly, "Maybe recognition comes when you have the courage to face death." He looked toward Harry through the curtain with a meaning in his eyes. He grinned. "Seamus will definitely regret missing this adventure." They laughed, then fell into their usual worries about house points. "We broke 100 rules," Hermione pointed out. "If they count those, we'll lose more points than we gained." When Lights Out was approaching, Madame Pomfrey bustled in, stepped into the cubicle, and forced a grassy-smelling potion down Hermione's throat before shooing Loren away. "Go back to your dormitory. Even at holidays, no wandering the corridors at night." Hermione stuck her tongue out at the potion and watched Loren's retreating back for a long time. Earlier in the term, she'd seen Malfoy speaking with Loren in private. What had they discussed? Had the Chamber of Secrets or Crabbe come up? Had they spoken of Voldemort? And that day, she and Loren visited Hagrid only to find Dumbledore conducting some alchemical experiment on Acromantula hatchling's eyes in the hut and promptly dismissing her. What had been said then? Loren stayed calm after the basilisk incident, inscrutable as ever. Questions crowded her mind. She didn't know the whole truth, but she could trace some of the threads. Still, if Loren chose not to talk, she wouldn't force him. She trusted him. It was very late when Loren returned to the Gryffindor Tower. The common room was empty. Only red embers smoldered in the fireplace. Seamus and Neville had gone home, and Harry and Ron were still in the hospital wing, so the dormitory was quiet. He washed, changed into pajamas, and settled into his four-poster. Just as he was about to pick up a book, a dense, cold presence burst into the room through the open window. Loren's hand went to his wand. The intruder was Lord Voldemort. More solid than the slimy wraith he'd been in the Chamber of Secrets, Voldemort's figure hovered like a dark cloud. A thin, misty aura seeped from him and swirled constantly. The wisp of him darted back and forth in the air, not coming any closer. Loren leveled his wand and demanded, "What do you want?" At the tip of Voldemort's wand, a scarlet glow throbbed and threw off small sparks. Magic gathered there, ready to lash out. From the cloud-like shape, a flat, serpentine face formed, a wide mouth, long forked tongue, no proper nose, and two narrow slits where eyes should be, each slit emitting an unnerving light. A hoarse, oddly polite voice issued from the mist. "Sage of the era, descendant of Morgan, Mr. Loren Morgan, I have long heard your name." The voice had a false humility to it. "Although you surely know who I am, allow me to introduce myself. Lord Voldemort, heir of Slytherin, seeker of immortality." Seeing Loren's wand poised, Voldemort gave a soft laugh. "No need to be so defensive. Do not judge me by rumors. I am, at present, rather weak, am I not?" Loren's eyes tightened. Voldemort, sensing the impatience, continued without delay. "I'll be plain. I won't bother with flowery offers of recruitment." He let a beat pass, then smiled with a thin, cold humor. "House elves are lowly and despised by many, yet they possess one admirable trait, loyalty." Loren's jaw went tight. "Get to the point." "Extreme torment can break the blockade of a memory charm," Voldemort said. "The memory charm you cast on that house elf was undone when I broke its fingers, one by one." Loren felt a chill. He hadn't expected that. He knew, in theory, that intense pain or severe emotional trauma could crack a memory charm, basic lessons from early studies, but he'd assumed such cases were rare. He had overlooked house elves. As oppressed, abused beings, they were precisely the sort to suffer extreme torment. Still, the basilisk incident had been resolved, and whatever the house elf had remembered, it no longer mattered much. Or so he told himself. Voldemort's voice took on a taunting edge. "I'm sure you think, it's just a house elf, no matter. But Dumbledore disdains your methods, memory charms, legilimency, mind manipulation. The old man speaks of love as the greatest magic. Do you want to know why he praises that?" Loren watched him coolly. Dumbledore's distaste for manipulative magic hadn't driven a wedge between them. Their relationship was complicated but intact. He listened. Voldemort continued, silky and insistent. "Think, why does Dumbledore extol love? Why did the four founders prize different virtues? Courage, wisdom, kindness, glory. These are not mere traits. They point to a power hidden in heart and soul, an ancient force stronger than many traditions." "What has that to do with me?" Loren asked, unmoved. He inspected the wraith before him. Voldemort had started a war, slaughtered wizards and muggles, purged families in the name of blood purity. If he were sincere, he would not have the mercy to spare Loren. He had always chosen fear and domination as his tools. Voldemort answered with cold clarity. "Muggle and wizarding societies will inevitably merge. Wizards can harness Muggle achievements quickly. Muggles cannot master magic. An imbalance will be born. Cooperate with me, and together we can remake the world to our design." He spoke as though repeating what he had learned from the basilisk's memories. The idea that a born sage of the age would lead transformation and that far-sighted wizards could see the patterns shaping society. Loren said nothing. Months earlier, words like these might have driven him from the room. The problems of an era, clashes between societies, those were not his to fix. But since regaining his memories and learning the truth about his parents, something in him had shifted. He listened now, not because he trusted Voldemort, but because he was weighing the pieces. He would not be foolish enough to believe Voldemort's smooth promises. No matter how persuasive, Master Voldemort would not stop at collaboration. He would consume anyone who stood in his way. Still, a tool offered willingly had to be used. Loren let a small grin curve his lips. "All right," he said slowly, "but you hand me Pettigrew first." The mist rising from the wraith stilled, and Lord Voldemort asked, startled, "How did you know I was planning to rescue Wormtail?" It was Loren's turn to be surprised. He had suspected collusion between the Ministry and the werewolves under Voldemort's influence, but he hadn't expected Voldemort to be scheming a prison break already. Loren paused, then met the dark presence's gaze. "I just know the Ministry didn't sentence Peter Pettigrew to death. If he's not dead, he'll have a way out. By the original story, Voldemort would revive and free the Death Eaters in Azkaban. Pettigrew was only one of them. When the truth of that year comes out," Loren continued, "the wizarding world will have no use for him. He'll come to you again, so I'm asking for him in advance." He had been taking a gamble. Even if Loren wanted revenge, there was no way he could truly ally himself with Voldemort. Turning from Dumbledore now would be like switching sides in a lost cause. He watched the wraith more closely. The magic within Voldemort's form wasn't consolidated the way a normal wizard's is. It was particulate, a gray mist of tiny motes that kept forming and dissolving. Some unseen force bound those drifting particles together. Magic, soul, memory, feeling, kneaded into a shape that hovered between life and death, refusing to fade. Horcrux magic, Loren thought. He ran through the known Horcruxes, the diary destroyed, the diadem and the ring recovered, Nagini gone, Hufflepuff's cup stored in Gringotts, Slytherin's locket at Grimmauld Place. If all those Horcruxes were destroyed before Voldemort returned, could he still maintain this wraith form? Or would he simply dissipate? There was no way to know. Voldemort still had a fragment of soul lodged in Harry's scar. Only Voldemort himself could remove it. The gray mist flickered like a shadow in the dark. Voldemort's consciousness lay hidden within, and he peered at Loren with a sinister amusement, entirely unaware of the young wizard's private speculations. He was still thinking about Pettigrew. This Loren Morgan had no idea what he was asking for, Voldemort thought. How interesting. Had Loren deduced the rescue from the Ministry's movements and the werewolves' activity, or was it coincidence? Voldemort favored the former. A smile spread in the shadows. An orphan, exceptionally talented, and with a near instinct for reading people, Dumbledore might see echoes of himself in this one. "Does that lowly rat mean anything to you?" Voldemort asked, voice cold. "I cannot imagine he is worth your insistence." "Personal reasons. None of your business," Loren said, looking him straight in the face. "I'm also curious why the Dark Lord would bother rescuing him. There are more competent Death Eaters in Azkaban, aren't there?" For a moment, Loren wanted Voldemort to legitimize him, to test whether the Horcrux magic could withstand whatever curse had been cast with the Book of Abraham. Voldemort, tonight, was unusually polite and far too measured. Loren suppressed the thought and kept watching. A faint crystalline blue glow shone in the dark wraith's eyes, like starlight scanning the trajectories of the particulate magic. Loren could not grasp the principles at work, but he could record the motion. "You don't trust me?" Voldemort asked. His tone was calm but declarative. "I am willing to trust you, Morgan." "No, Loren. You are more important than you imagine." He explained the logic of rescuing Pettigrew. Rats are easy to transport. Pettigrew had turned into a rat under Dementor torment before, so a rat would draw no suspicion. With a missing toe for proof, an exchange could be arranged. Voldemort spoke smoothly and at length, acting as if he truly trusted Loren. To him, it was merely a test. If Loren exposed his plan to Dumbledore, it would prove Loren a gullible fool. If not, it would show Dumbledore and his followers weren't as close to Loren as they appeared. Either way, Voldemort would learn more about his intentions and loyalties. Most importantly, Voldemort said with a snake-like hiss, he's easy to control. Loren nodded. Pettigrew was cowardly and without options, easy to bend. Another question nagged at him. You've already contacted the Crab family. Surely you're not short of servants. If they were truly loyal, Voldemort replied with a soft laugh, why did none of them come to help their master, to one they swore eternal fealty to over the past 10 years? Voldemort's voice did not tremble, but his words wound into a more elaborate tone than usual. They saw me take measures against death long ago. They saw my power proven many times. Yet the moment they thought me at a disadvantage, they believed I was finished. Why? Because they believe in a force greater than me, Dumbledore. So I let the Crabbe family believe that this wraith is another, mightier version of Lord Voldemort. They imagine a dark lord waiting in the wings, biding his time until Dumbledore dies. If they could see me as I am, he added, do you think they would remain obedient? They are loyal not to people, but to strength. Hearing Voldemort speak like this made Loren think of the Elder Wand. He licked his lips. It seems we are at an impasse. You can't abandon Pettigrew, and I can't let him go. Perhaps our conversation ends here. The smile on Voldemort's misty lips widened. On the contrary, because you are determined about him, you are precisely the one who should cooperate with me. Would the law-abiding Dumbledore let you bypass the ministry to deal with that rat yourself? He paused to give Loren time to think. If I rescue Wormtail, you'll have a chance to exact your justice. Until then, let him live a little longer. Our goals do not conflict. Loren bristled. He didn't trust Voldemort for a second. Then what is the price? He asked, voice low and fierce. Just study, Voldemort said mildly. You're only a second year. You need not act now. Seeing Loren's unease, Voldemort smiled as if satisfied. I have time. Time will prove I am a better ally for you than Dumbledore. With that, he leaned forward, shot out through the window, and vanished into the misty night. Sk, what a crude way to win people over, Loren thought as he closed the window nimbly. Voldemort could not outplay Dumbledore, not yet. But should he tell Dumbledore about Pettigrew? Loren flopped onto the four-poster bed in despair, arms and legs splayed. The candles had all burned out, and the black curtains wrapped the posts in layers of velvet. He pictured the bustling street again, the sky-blue dress, a life for a life, debt for debt. Pettigrew deserved to be punished. Despite his resolve to trick Voldemort, Loren found himself tempted by the offer. On the other side stood Dumbledore, the white-bearded man who smiled, handed out sweets, and taught him never to toy with people's hearts. After a long struggle, he surrendered to indecision. He reached for the fantastic book and muttered, I'll tell him tomorrow after I get back from St. Mungo's. It's not hiding, just a short delay. Inside the fantastic book, within the brightly lit library, Loren's consciousness arrived like always. Flamel, he called. In the Muggle books section, Nicholas Flamel was leaning against a shelf, reading Friedrich's Philosophy in the tragic age of the Greeks. The Muggle volumes the library had scanned had massively expanded its holdings. Flamel had lately taken to philosophy, intrigued by how non-magical minds viewed the world. He tucked the book aside and in a soft blur appeared beside Loren. If I recall correctly, you have no lessons today, Flamel said, leading Loren to sit on a long bench. You look like you have a great deal to say. I do. Loren sat up. First, in Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, I saw the illustration on the book of Abraham's first 7 pages. He told Flamel everything. The stone door carved with a snake devouring a snake, the basilisk in the chamber, the way Voldemort's fragment had burrowed into the creature's mouth. Is this a vision both Abraham and Slytherin foresaw? Loren asked. Flamel repeated the phrase, snake devouring snake, and for once he looked genuinely at a loss. The holders of the Book of Abraham had always offered personal, symbolic interpretations of its images, using them to shape their own pursuits of the Philosopher's Stone. Some read the snake-devouring snake as a conceptual diagram, 2 similar beings in different forms, one consuming the other to symbolize transformation or synthesis. It was lofty, metaphysical territory. Loren had seen the scene in the flesh. It was maddening. Flamel stared at him, 6 centuries of memory clouding his face. Had the path previous holders took been wrong? Had he overthought things in his decades-long search for the perfect elixir? He had a dozen questions for Loren, but he swallowed them. He couldn't risk skewing the young man's understanding of the book. I'm not sure, he said finally, voice low. Interpret it as it makes sense to you. Loren felt a little exasperated at Flamel's hesitation. Be helpful, but he let it go. When will I get the next interpretation? He asked. When Mars is bright again? Perhaps, Flamel said after a moment. Your situation is different from mine. I can't advise you. Loren accepted that and moved on. Voldemort told me that great wizards all have distinct traits: Gryffindor's courage, Ravenclaw's wisdom, Hufflepuff's honesty and kindness, Slytherin's thirst for glory. Flamel's eyes deepened. It's not as mysterious as it sounds. Consider other labels: the vileness attributed to a dark wizard like Helbo, the irresistible figure of death itself, even the tales of Beetle the Bard. Even Death and Beetle the Bard? Loren blurted. Flamel chuckled. You see the absurdity, then. Many of these traits are labels later generations affix. Are Hufflepuff's qualities really only honesty and kindness? There's also a steadiness in hardship, a love of comfort and good food, practical gifts, not lofty philosophy. Loren rattled off possibilities and realized the old categories were less rigid than he'd been taught. Flamel tapped the virtual armrest with translucent fingers. These wizards aren't great because of their assigned traits. People notice the traits because these figures are powerful. Power magnifies quirks into legends. They exchanged a little alchemical talk. Then Loren left the fantastic book. The library settled into quiet again. Flamel sat on the bench, fingers making a soft rhythmic tapping. Images flitted through his silvered eyes. The fear spread by Bloody Mary, the deaths of the Black Death, centuries of human folly and terror clearing like dust in his memory. He let out a small inward sigh at the absurdity of it all. 216. Christmas vacation begins December 19th, Saturday, 5 days before Christmas. Loren woke early and had just opened his window when a cold wind rushed in, chilling him from head to toe. Thick clouds hung in the pale sky, blotting out the sun, but the day was bright with falling snow. The distant forests and hills were silvered. Between heaven and earth there was nothing but white. Toward the greenhouses, a tiny figure, no larger than a pinprick from his window, trudged along. Professor Sprout. Even during the holidays, the herbology professor could not rest. "Tsk, it's freezing," Loren muttered and dressed, washed, and made his bed. He had stayed up late the night before, talking with Lord Voldemort until midnight and then consulting Flamel for half the night, so he had gone to bed later than usual. The sky told him he'd overslept a little, but there were no classes today, so it didn't matter much, except he might miss breakfast in the Great Hall. Leaving his dormitory, he glanced down through the stair railing and saw Ginny, George, and Fred sitting in a row on the sofa in the common room. The twins were huddled together, whispering rapidly, lips moving so fast it was almost comic. Ginny sat obediently between them, hands folded on her knees, waiting. They looked up when they heard Loren's footsteps. All three faces registered surprise at once. "Are you waiting for me?" Loren asked, pausing on the stairs. George and Fred, unable to be patient for Loren's slow descent, jumped up and rushed over. Each grabbed one of his arms and lifted him onto the sofa. On the small table in front of them were beef pasties and hot milk, breakfast prepared for him. George handed Loren a beef pasty wrapped in parchment. "Percy told us everything. You found out who the real heir of Slytherin is." Fred set a glass of warm milk in his other hand. "And you chased the basilisk into the Chamber of Secrets and killed it." Ginny shoved Fred aside and squeezed in close to Loren, her eyes full of concern. "I heard Harry was hurt. Is it serious? How is he?" Loren blinked. "He's fine. He and Ron are in the hospital wing." "Why haven't you gone to see them then?" Ginny asked. "Percy says Madame Pomfrey controls visitors and visiting hours strictly," George answered for them. "He told us not to disturb them." Ginny sat back down, satisfied. "You really believe that?" Loren said, taking a bite of the pasty. Percy's warning sounded like the kind meant to scare his younger siblings. Yesterday the hospital wing had been packed, and Madame Pomfrey hadn't said anything about barring visitors. "Madame Pomfrey thinks everywhere outside the hospital wing is dangerous," George shrugged. Fred jabbed Loren's arm excitedly. "Quick, tell us the story of Gryffindor's heroes fighting the basilisk. We can't wait." Loren finished the pasty in a few bites, drank the milk down, wiped the foam from his lip, and said, "I'll take you to the hospital wing. Ask Harry and Ron yourselves." Ginny shot to her feet, delighted. They left Gryffindor Tower together, hurried down the stairs to the hospital ward, and Loren knocked. The large door opened a crack, and Madame Pomfrey peered out, wearing her white swallowtail cap. Her stern gaze swept past Loren and landed on the Weasley twins, and her brow tightened. Loren knew why the twins didn't come by themselves. They were likely on Madame Pomfrey's most wanted list. George and Fred plastered on their most angelic smiles. They were as well-behaved as two scamps could manage. Madame Pomfrey's expression suggested she had been through it all before. "Good morning, Madame Pomfrey. We're here to visit Harry and the others," Loren said politely. "Good morning," the Weasleys echoed. Madame Pomfrey squinted at them suspiciously, then stepped aside and opened the door. "No roughhousing, no shouting, no snacks," she warned. Harry and Ron had just finished the hospital breakfast: boiled eggs, brown bread, boiled chicken, nutritious and foul-tasting. They had been caught with illicit snacks the day before when Dumbledore had been present, and, out of respect, Madame Pomfrey had let it slide. Today she confiscated any contraband at once. Harry and Ron watched their snacks disappear, then looked up at their visitors. "Why are you here so early?" they asked. Ginny darted to Harry's bedside and inspected his bandaged right hand. Harry flushed under her attentions. "It's fine now. Not even a scar." Madame Pomfrey insisted on bandaging it. Ginny's boldness evaporated like a soap bubble at his casual tone. She blushed, mumbled, and tucked back next to Ron. George and Fred, mindful of Harry's injury, turned their attention to Ron instead. They flanked him, draped their arms across his shoulders, and shook him affectionately. "Look what our little Ronnie did," George crowed, thumping Ron on the shoulder. "You gave us a surprise right after the holiday started." "Was it on purpose?" Fred teased. "Too bad Harry didn't get to scare anyone with Petrificus Totalis at a Quidditch match." "Quick, tell us what happened," the twins demanded. Loren slipped into Hermione's cubicle as the noise swelled. The curtain muffled the chatter. Inside felt like a different world. Hermione, a small cat-like figure now, sat on the bed with her legs stretched out. She wore a hospital gown with a robe over her shoulders. The blanket covered her lower half. Her hands were more paw than hand as she pawed at an animagus notebook. She'd heard the commotion, and her round, cat-like eyes lit up when she saw Loren. There was a curious brightness in them. "Bored in the ward?" Loren sat beside her and peered at the notebook. "It's all right, just awkward to turn pages," Hermione said softly. She had been shaken by the botched polyjuice, but with the basilisk problem over, no classes in the holidays, and no urgent crises, she had come to accept her current appearance. Hermione thrived on books. As long as she had them, she could bear anything. Loren grinned at the sight of her curled paw-like hands. "If my hands were curled up like that, I wouldn't be able to hold a quill. I wouldn't have holiday homework to worry about." "Don't be ridiculous," Hermione pushed his head away. "Madame Pomfrey says I'll recover in about 2 weeks. I'll catch up on my homework." She sniffed, then leaned forward and sniffed Loren's face, tilting her head like a cat. "Beef pasty and milk?" she asked. Her cool, damp nose brushed his cheek. Loren stiffened and moved subtly away. "I woke up late. George and Fred brought my breakfast." Hermione nodded, accepting it. "Don't get lazy just because it's the holidays. Finish your homework early so you don't end up rushing like Harry and Ron before term starts." She thought for a moment. "From now on, come around every day. I'll watch you do yours, and we can go over the animagus material. Professor McGonagall will test us at the end of the holidays." "Got it, Professor Granger." Loren got a light smack from Hermione's paw. The curtain frame rattled like knocking. "Hermione, can we peek?" George called from outside, loud and excited. They'd heard the whole story from Harry and Ron, including how the polyjuice potion had gone wrong, and the twins were more than curious. "No!" Hermione shrieked and ducked under the blanket. She could cope with Loren seeing her as this, but the thought of more people seeing her like this was unbearable. Outside, the twins hovered like children at a sweet shop. Fred reached to lift the curtain for a peek. Slap! Ginny smacked his hand hard, and it left a red mark. Ginny stood with hands on her hips, looking exactly like Mrs. Weasley when she was scolding the boys. "Hermione said you're not allowed to look," she snapped. George began to protest, but Ginny raised her hand again, as if about to whack them a second time. The twins deflated. They muttered sulky complaints. Their whining and the commotion nearby attracted Madame Pomfrey, who hurried over, her hair bristling beneath her cap. "Didn't I say no shouting?" she said sharply. George and Fred lowered their heads. Madame Pomfrey checked Harry and Ron, announced they were fit to be discharged, and glared at the group. "They too can go home. Now leave," she ordered. Thank you, Madame Pomfrey. Harry and Ron perked up, dressed, and slipped out with Ginny trailing behind, half embarrassed, half proud. Ginny had been grateful to her brothers for pooling money for a complete new set of books and robes. She understood how humiliating it could be to go to class in shabby gear, but she was still exasperated by their mischief. They'd wanted to peek at Hermione despite her wishes. Ginny, now playing the maternal role, hauled them away, shaking her head. Loren settled back into the cubicle, feeling innocent. Madame Pomfrey had driven everyone out. What did that matter to him? Then her voice sounded from the doorway. Mr. Morgan, you come out too. Hermione and Loren exchanged looks. Hermione gave him a small, amused smile and mouthed, Goodbye, Mr. Morgan. Coming, Madame Pomfrey, Loren called. He stepped out, ready to go. Madame Pomfrey stopped him. You forgot. Dumbledore instructed you to accompany me to St. Mungo's to take Mr. Lockhart. She poured a small bottle of a clear, moonlit potion into Lockhart as she spoke. His mind, his soul, suffered irreversible damage. I studied late into the night to find this potion to rouse him. Hermione parted the curtain a crack and peered out. The potion worked quickly. Gilderoy Lockhart blinked several times, then opened his eyes, sat up, smiled with his usual sunny charm, and looked around as if nothing were wrong. Hello, he said cheerfully, as if greeting old acquaintances. This is a strange place, isn't it? Do you live here? 217. St. Mungo's Hospital. Are you a healer? Why am I here? Gilderoy Lockhart peered up at the woman in sensible robes and a white apron and guessed at her profession. Poor Professor Lockhart, she sighed, prying his eyelids open to check his pupils. Oh, you're calling me Professor Lockhart. He let her fingers prod him like a performer's hand on a stage. A professor? Merlin's beard, I thought I'd never amount to anything. Merlin's beard, Madame Pomfrey muttered, then, softer. Gilderoy Lockhart, do you remember what year it is and how old you are? What year? Lockhart's mouth fell open. He fumbled for an answer but came up with nothing. Pomfrey cut him off. Get up. We're going to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Lockhart, unfamiliar with the hospital but obedient, swung his legs out of bed, dressed hastily, and stayed at her side. Pomfrey drew a slim silver syringe from a cabinet of instruments and muttered, Good thing Headmaster Dumbledore left us a back door. Loren and Lockhart both stared at the syringe. It was a portkey, slender and sharp, its metal glinting with an odd cold light. Whether Dumbledore or Pomfrey had arranged it was hard to tell. As Hogwarts' resident healer, she maintained close ties with St. Mungo's. If not for the school's protections, she might have asked for a flu connection. Come on, both of you. Hands here, Pomfrey said, holding the silver syringe between them. I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. A hook caught them just below the navel and tugged hard. Their feet left the ground. The world turned into swirling colors and a rush of wind. Then, with a sickening drop, their knees buckled as their feet hit hard earth. Pomfrey's voice was in their ears. We've arrived. They were crammed into a narrow red telephone booth. The three of them felt a little foolish and very crowded. Pomfrey pushed open the door and stepped out first, Lockhart bobbing after her. Loren was last to squeeze through and found himself in a deserted alley. One end was bricked up, only a single opening allowed entry. The neat brickwork and graffiti made it unmistakably Muggle. This isn't St. Mungo's yet, Loren said. To protect patients, everything entering St. Mungo's, person or thing, must be inspected, Pomfrey said briskly. She led them through a maze of alleys. There have been incidents where dangerous items or people got in and harmed patients. During the last war, there were attempts to attack the hospital. Security's been tightened since. Originally, the hospital was to be in Diagon Alley, but there wasn't space. Undetectable extension charms would interfere with some wards, and you can't bury a hospital entirely underground. Patients need sunlight. This location also makes treating Muggle injuries easier. Muggle injuries? Loren asked. Yes, Pomfrey said. Magical objects leak into the Muggle world all the time. People turn up with fingers bitten off by cursed doorknobs, broken bones after quaffles appear in the street. Poor Muggles come here for bone regrowth, memory charms. She shrugged. So what does the Ministry do? Loren thought, as they cut out into a wide, busy street. Christmas decorations brightened the shops. Muggles bustled about with parcels. Lockhart's eyes lit up. Pomfrey slapped her forehead. I forgot to change into muggle clothes. Luckily, it's nearly Christmas. We won't stand out too much. Pomfrey's uniform of tailcoat and white smock looked like a smart restaurant server's. Lockhart had a well-cut suit. Loren's robes, by contrast, felt conspicuous. They threaded through shoppers, Pomfrey occasionally tugging Lockhart lest they be separated in the crowds rushing past an electronics store. They halted before an old red brick department store. Dusty, closed for renovation signs hung on its doors. The faded sign read, Tau Tau Limited. The mannequins in the display window wore garish, out-of-date clothes and cracked wigs. Everything, though, thrummed with charms. Muggle-repelling wards, undetectable extension charms, protective runes, anti-spatial wards. Dozens of spells and alchemical glyphs shone faintly. The pattern felt familiar, as if some of the great names of magic had been consulted. Pomfrey breathed on the glass, fogging it. A patient with magical injuries needs treatment, she told the mannequins. The central plastic figure's eyes flickered. It nodded and stiffly pointed. Pomfrey seized their arms and walked straight through the glass, leaving them behind. They stepped into a crowded waiting room. Notices plastered the walls, clean cauldrons to prevent potion spoilage, antidotes must be authorized by a qualified healer, and a large portrait watched them. Dilys Derwent, healer at St. Mungo's, 1722 to 1741, principal of Hogwarts, 1741 to 1768. Her painted eyes seemed to regard Loren. She blinked, smiled, and slid out of the frame, departing down a corridor, no doubt to inform Dumbledore. The room was a catalogue of ailments. People, and not people, sat on wobbling wooden chairs, reading out-of-date copies of Wizard Weekly and the Daily Prophet. One witch's speech was punctuated by rapid bird calls. Faces sprouted extra eyes, noses or mouths in absurd places. A wizard had an extra hand growing from his chest. Healers in green robes moved among them, clipboard in hand, badges stitched with crossed wand and bone. At the inquiry desk, a plump blonde witch answered a distraught middle-aged wizard, whose face had been rearranged by a cursed mask from Borgin and Burke's. His ears were the only features in their original position. His mouth sat in the middle of his face, his nose on his Adam's apple, and his eyes blinked from his palms. "Does your appearance prevent you from reading?" the witch asked, hand over her wand. "Of course not," he crowed. "My vision's much wider." The inquiry witch jabbed a finger at the sign beside her desk. First floor, artifact accidents, cauldron explosions, wand misfires, broom collisions, etc. Second floor, creature-induced injuries, stings, burns, impalements. Third floor, magical bugs and contagions, dragon pox, vanishing sickness, spattergroit. Fourth floor, potion and plant poisoning, rashes, nausea, uncontrollable laughter. Fifth floor, spell damage, persistent hexes, jinxes, misused charms. Sixth floor, tea shop and hospital shop. "I thought this was an artifact accident," the rearranged wizard called happily as he left. Another patient, a wizard with an extra hand on his chest, shuffled up to the desk. The inquiry witch took a deep breath and shouted back into the office, "Jessica, write to the ministry. Report Borgin and Burke selling dark artifacts again." Pomfrey led Loren and Lockhart through double doors and down a corridor lit by candles encapsulated in crystal globes. Portraits of famous healers watched them from the walls. Mungo Bonham, 1560 to 1659, appeared at both the start and end of the sequence. They climbed crooked stairs to the 5th floor and entered the spell damage ward, a small room with a cabinet, a table, and 2 chairs. A healer about Pomfrey's age, green robe, tinsel garland askew on her head, sprang up and embraced Pomfrey. "Poppy, long time no see." "Long time, Mellum," Pomfrey laughed, returning the hug. Mellum gripped Pomfrey's hand and teased, "When are you going to become principal of Hogwarts? We're all waiting for your good news." Pomfrey rolled her eyes. "Stop it, I'm here with a patient." Mellum's face sobered. They sat Lockhart down and ran through a battery of tests, asking offbeat questions with the fondness of a doting aunt. "Hello, poor little lamb. Do you remember your name?" she asked. Lockhart tilted his head, frowned, stammered, and after a long pause managed, Gilderoy." He brightened at the sound of it. "Gilderoy, oh yes, Gilderoy," he cheered. "And your surname?" Mellum pressed. Lockhart thought hard and came up blank. He began to flail and flush. Suddenly, with the manic self-assurance of habit, he grabbed a quill from the table as if to sign an autograph. The quill touched paper, the ink feathered, and then he froze. I can't write my name, he whispered, stunned. The urge to sign, honed by years of picture books and fan letters, warred with an empty mind. Mellum took the quill and the paper, filled in the record herself, and leaned close to Pomfrey. Permanent charm damage, she murmured. He can't even remember who he is. Bless him. He'll need intensive treatment and a great deal of luck. Loren heard every word. He watched Lockhart with the helplessness of a child and smiled faintly, more to himself than anyone else. He remembered the details in those manuscripts about Bates and the reasons Dumbledore had given him to see this. He did not regret coming. I don't regret it at all, he thought. After filling out the forms and registering him, Healer Mellum was busy for a while completing Lockhart's admission and arranging for him to be placed in a closed ward. Loren and Madame Pomfrey followed her, both meant to return to Hogwarts after seeing the ward and hearing the treatment plan, one to report to Dumbledore and the other to Professor McGonagall. Mellum led them to the door of the Janus Thicky ward, tapped it with her wand, and said, Alohomora. The door swung open. He doesn't know who he is, she explained as they stepped inside. If he wanders out, he won't remember how to get back. That would be dangerous for him. We have to keep him in a closed ward so he can't run off. She held Lockhart's arm firmly as she settled him on a bed against the wall and left paper and a pen on the bedside table so he could quietly practice his signature. With her notebook in hand, she outlined the treatment to the two visitors. His soul and memories are like a messy bowl of porridge. Soul and consciousness injuries are very tricky. We can only try intensive treatment and hope for the best. If he never recovers fully, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Someone will look after him. Mr. Lucius Malfoy has recently made a generous donation to the hospital, she added with a narrowing of her eyes into an almost warm smile. Loren listened silently while Madame Pomfrey made mental notes for Professor McGonagall. Other patients occupied the ward, a sallow-faced, melancholy wizard, a witch with a hairier-than-usual face. In the two innermost beds lay a slightly swollen, dazed-looking wizard and a thin, haggard witch in pajamas, her eyes unnaturally large, hair white and patchy. She clutched a crumpled wrapper from a super bubble gum. A dull knock at the ward door made Mellum look at the wall calendar. Oh, almost forgot. Today's Mrs. Longbottom's visiting day, she exclaimed. Madame Pomfrey's shoulders tightened at the name, but Mellum hurried to open the door. Loren glanced over and saw two figures enter, a rather frightening old witch in a green robe. Not Mellum's utilitarian green, but a brighter, more elaborately patterned garment, trimmed with a moth-eaten fox fur and a pointed hat decorated with a vulture specimen, and a stiff little boy behind her. Neville. At the threshold, Mrs. Longbottom chatted with the healer about her son's parents' condition. Neville's gaze moved around the ward, pausing long on Lockhart, then on Madame Pomfrey, and finally settling on Loren with a look that meant more than his words. As he approached, he greeted Madame Pomfrey, then, with a complicated expression and a slightly dazed voice, said to Loren, "Loren, I didn't expect to see you here." He hesitated, then blurted, "So, just as Seamus said, you lot couldn't wait for the holidays to start and sent Lockhart straight to St. Mungo's?" Loren bristled. "What are you talking about?" he protested, weakly, because Seamus's accusation had a ring of truth. "We dealt with the basilisk, found out who opened the Chamber of Secrets. Lockhart is just." He trailed off. Neville only caught the gist and nodded sympathetically. "Poor Seamus," Neville said softly. The exchange was brief and then over. Like so many things in the ward, it settled quickly into the background. Mrs. Longbottom approached and greeted Madame Pomfrey, then turned her attention to Loren. She had overheard the tail end of their conversation and asked, with a sharp, inspecting tone, "Is he your friend, my dear Neville?" Being called fond names in public left Neville crimson. Loren watched the boy shrink. Mrs. Longbottom's eagle-like hand extended, dry and bony. Yes, Neville has told me about you. You taught him to make those frozen pears and helped him through so much, haven't you? A good boy." "Hello, Mrs. Longbottom," Loren said politely, taking her hand and praising Neville a little. Mrs. Longbottom did not receive it as a compliment. Her eyes, beady and stern beneath her hat, narrowed. "How useless," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You should be focusing on your studies at school. Why would you miss me? I must say, you don't have your father's talent, nor any ability." Neville opened his mouth but could not answer. The flush drained from his face. Loren's brows tightened. With a parent like that, it was no wonder Neville lacked confidence. Before the old woman could continue, Loren stepped in to defend him. Mrs. Longbottom, Neville isn't without talent. He has his own strengths. He did very well last term. His herbology grades have always been good, and with his new wand, his charms and transfiguration have improved a lot. He passed the selection to join Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration Club, and in the dueling club, he showed remarkable courage. Loren turned to Neville, who had been staring at his shoes. "Didn't you tell your grandmother?" Neville stammered, stuck for words. Mrs. Longbottom's hat trembled on her head with a pleased, disbelieving wobble. "Really? He never showed any signs of that," she said, astonished. Seeing Neville at a loss, Loren added, growing more emphatic, "As early as first year, Neville stood up to Vincent Crabbe from Slytherin. If you knew the sort of people Crabbe associates with, you'd understand. He's not small trouble. In this year's dueling club, he even protected his classmates from a python summoned by a certain little dark wizard. He's brave." Joy washed over Mrs. Longbottom, barely contained. She turned to Madame Pomfrey for confirmation. Madame Pomfrey nodded. She had been seeing Neville in the hospital wing almost every week for all manner of accidents, potion spills, trips on stairs, run-ins with herbology plants, and so on. "He also shows a real aptitude for healing," she added. Mrs. Longbottom's excitement nearly toppled her. She leaned on the bed frame to steady herself and shuffled toward the two inner beds, muttering, "I must tell them. I must tell them." "Grandma!" Neville followed, helping her along. Loren and Madame Pomfrey trailed behind, curious about Neville's parents' condition. When Mrs. Longbottom reached the beds, she fell silent. The shock of seeing her son and daughter-in-law in such a state was overwhelming. Age made these emotional swings harder on her. She sank onto a chair by the bed, breathing hard, torn between joy and sorrow. Alice, Neville's mother, brightened at seeing Neville, and, although she seemed unable to speak, she timidly reached out. "Another one?" Mrs. Longbottom murmured tiredly. "Good, Alice, good. Neville, take it." Neville knew the ritual. He opened his hand and Alice placed a small, crumpled super bubble wrapper into his palm. He closed his fingers around it and she hummed a little tune, then lay back with a faint smile. That small exchange seemed to satisfy the broken part of her mind. His father sat on his bed, cross-legged, watching them with a foolish smile. Saliva leaked onto the bib pinned to his chest. Loren took in their condition. The adult's magic was weak, far weaker than Neville's and even weaker than Lockhart's. Years of disuse, combined with damaged souls and frail bodies, had leached the strength from them. There were no obvious lingering curses on them, which suggested no continuing malignant magic was at work. If no long-term curse was preserving the damage, Loren thought with interest, then perhaps a careful reconstruction of their twisted souls and fractured consciousness could help, if magic could be applied in the right way. Mrs. Longbottom, having drawn a ragged breath, declared proudly, "Be proud, Neville, proud!" "I know," Neville said shortly. Mrs. Longbottom straightened, triumphant. "My son and daughter-in-law were driven mad by you-know-who's followers," she said with rough pride, then began to pant from the exertion of her emotions. Neville stroked his grandmother's back and held the candy wrapper in his other hand. Loren asked gently, "Could you tell me exactly what happened?" Neville looked at Loren and Madame Pomfrey, reluctant to reopen the wound. Mrs. Longbottom snapped, "Tell them! They sacrificed everything. You should be proud, not ashamed." Pressed, Neville took a steadying breath and spoke quietly. "My mother and father were aurors. They were both very talented, highly respected." Mrs. Longbottom interjected with fierce agreement. "They escaped Lord Voldemort's clutches 3 times, Neville continued, and the name made Mrs. Longbottom's breathing quicken. "After Voldemort's fall, they were captured by a Death Eater, Bellatrix Lestrange. She used the Cruciatus curse on them. It affected their minds and drove them mad. Their consciousness never cleared." Hearing that, Mrs. Longbottom's face softened into a satisfied smile. She finally seemed to accept the change in Neville as proof he could restore the family name. Loren, looking between the old witch and the 2 ruined adults, felt his misgivings about Neville's upbringing deepen. Melancholy and anger warred inside him. When they took their leave of the Longbottoms, Madame Pomfrey and Loren left St. Mungo's together and began the journey back to Hogwarts. Madame Pomfrey, Loren said as they walked, does the Cruciatus curse directly affect the soul? It's generally accepted that all three unforgivable curses do affect the soul, she replied. That's part of why they're unforgivable. Half an hour later, Loren sat at Dumbledore's desk in the headmaster's office, reporting on Lockhart, and, more importantly, on what he had learned about Neville's parents. Headmaster, I have that mirror, the one that reflects the mind, lets you enter deep layers of consciousness. If we could use it to project an illusion of their shattered minds and rebuild it from the inside, could we repair them? Silver instruments on the desk steamed gently. Fawkes dozed on his perch. Most of the portraits of previous headmasters slumbered too, except for Principal Dilys Derwent, who had once been a healer at St. Mungo's, whose portrait was bright with interest. A brilliant idea, Principal Derwent exclaimed from her frame. For so long we've been helpless with soul injuries because the soul is so mysterious. If you can project the soul, make the subconscious visible and tangible, repairing the projection might repair the soul. Her excitement faded into concern. But we don't know how the projection will behave. What if its self-defense mechanisms manifest? It could damage anyone who enters. And remember, that damage would be soul level. Dumbledore watched the faint steam, then leaned forward, smiling at Loren, pleased. It had always been his hope that Loren would learn from Lockhart's ruin, not to exploit minds, and in the end, Loren had brought a discovery. The old headmaster pushed back his beard and produced a box of cockroach clusters from a drawer, handing it to Loren with a conspiratorial air. Principal Derwent's worries are valid. I'll speak with some scholars who study the soul. Loren wondered at Dumbledore's sudden cheerfulness. The distraction of the candies answered that. Then Loren remembered another matter. Oh, and one more thing. Lord Voldemort came to see me last night. He told Dumbledore about Voldemort's plan to rescue people from Azkaban, withholding only some minor details. Dumbledore's deep blue eyes reflected the white mist from the silver instruments and looked thoughtful. He perceived that Loren had held something back, but it didn't trouble him. As long as Loren's heart stayed true, a small secret was nothing to worry about. If he intends to rescue them, then let him try, Dumbledore said languidly. I'm not a ministry official, Loren said. I can't stop him. Dumbledore chuckled, like a mischievous child. Loren realized then that the old headmaster intended to let matters run their course. The two men shared the last cockroach clusters, both speeding up for fear the other would finish the box first. They talked around the subject, slowing their own eating to slow the others, and between bites, Loren asked, do you think the traits that make famous wizards famous are tied to magic? Does the love you always speak of really have power? Dumbledore raised an eyebrow, popped another cluster into his mouth, and said, of course, love is the most powerful magic of all. Outside the window, snow fell without end, covering the world in white. The year 1992 closed beneath that quiet snowfall. In the Chamber of Secrets, dozens of leather trunks were neatly arranged around Loren and Snape. These trunks were for storing medicinal ingredients, their inner lids carved with crude 23 arrays and reinforced with numerous spells. Shortly after leaving the headmaster's office, Snape had pressed Loren into service to help process the 35's carcass and collect its materials for storage. Before them lay the massive 35, dozens of feet long, at the foot of the giant statue of Salazar Slytherin. Though it had been dead some time, there was no sign of decay. Its body was as thick as an oak trunk, its scales still glinting with a cold, hard, green metallic shine. The head was slightly flattened and triangular, a fatal puncture wound running from skull to upper jaw. Its once large, yellow eyes had been pecked blind by Fawkes. Only 2 shriveled eyeballs remained, fluid leaking from the wounds. Loren felt a sting of regret. He had been very interested in the lethal and petrifying 45 from the 35's eyes, and had even considered misappropriating those substances to make weapons. Without a steady source of 45, that idea was dead in the water. Examining the carcass up close, he noticed details he'd missed before. The 35's scales weren't smooth. 2 rows of short, blunt spines ran down its back, and thick, blunt, spine-like protrusions studded the head, giving it a rough, bumpy texture. Around 1/5 down the belly, large patches of scales had already been removed and piled nearby, the result of Snape's earlier work. "The 35 scales are extremely hard," Snape said, his voice cold and level in the cavern. "Difficult to cut with ordinary 40 or blades. I called you here to speed the processing and to check whether your sectum sempra has regressed." Loren swept his gaze away from the carcass and shot Snape a faintly scornful look, lips pursed. "If you want to exploit underage labor, say so. Don't hide it behind excuses. Professor, the 35's carcass isn't going to rot. Can't we just cut it bit by bit? The Christmas holiday's long, isn't it?" He tried to resist. Snape, inventor of sectum sempra and a masterful potions professor and materials worker, had only removed as much as he had after a long time, and it was only scales. If Loren got dragged in, he might spend his whole holiday in the chamber. Snape's expression did not change. He rolled up his sleeves and reached out, giving Loren's head a sharp smack. "Put away that insolent look and respect your teacher. There isn't time to waste. We need to process this before the Ministry and the Board of Governors arrive at the school." Loren winced, clutching his head, then nodded. He understood. The crab matter was under investigation, and the existence of the 35 would soon be exposed to the Ministry and the Board. A rarity like this would tempt many. If others were allowed in, even if Dumbledore and McGonagall could manage it, it would create endless complications. Don't be naive enough to think Hogwarts' things belong to Hogwarts. Given sufficient interest, many pure-blood families would demand a share in the name of Slytherin bloodline. Pure-blood families were all tangled together after generations of intermarriage. Looking back a few generations, everyone could find a relation. Even the Weasleys and the Malfoys could claim kin if they tried. "If I'd known, I should have gone home for the holidays," Loren complained, but followed Snape's lead and began to learn how to carve the scales. The scales were layered. Only by removing the top layer could they see the extent of those beneath. A large middle area already had scales peeled away, the boundary between black flesh and green scales stark. Loren pressed the exposed flesh. It was hard, like rough stone. Snape held a scale with one hand, propped it up, pointed his wand at its root, and murmured, "Sectum sempra." An invisible blade swept through the air. A diamond-shaped scale fell cleanly away, leaving a smooth cut. Snape tossed it into a trunk without looking at Loren and started on the next. "You could pluck them to preserve the scale's integrity," he said, "but then you'd have to clean the blood and flesh from them. Far more tedious." "Sectum sempra," Loren replied, imitating him. Snape raised his eyelids. "Have you learned it?" Loren said nothing and gripped a scale. He pointed his wand at its root. "Sectum sempra." The scale came away, but the cut was ragged. Experience mattered. After a few tries, it would be fine. Snape ignored the flaw and waved a hand, pointing at the head. "You start at the head. I'll take the tail. There the scales are more numerous and dense." Loren's eyes widened at the thought of the head, but he swallowed the urge to retort. What did Snape mean, more numerous and dense? The tail scales were more regular and layered neatly. The head scales were odd, irregularly attached, far more troublesome. Sensing his reluctance, Snape added in a composed tone, "After we finish, you can take some materials. Choose whatever you want. Anything else?" "Not at all," Loren blurted. Of course he wanted the 35's eyes. He chuckled and went straight to the head to examine the irregular scales. The scale at the very front, the one known as the 32, was neat and symmetrical. There was only one such scale on the creature. Since his technique was still raw, Loren decided to start with a less desirable scale. The fit and angles between scales and flesh on the head varied. Sectum sempra wasn't the hard part. Finding the right angle and visualizing the cut was. He whispered, "Sectum sempra." "Sectum sempra," Snape echoed. Invisible blades whistled through the chamber, cutting one scale after another. Circumorbital scales, 1233. Gradually, Loren peeled the head bare. His proficiency with Sectum sempra improved swiftly. Each casting required less thought. He could cut from any angle, choose entry points at will, direction, trajectory, control, and force shifted at a thought. Snape watched from a distance, a faint, almost imperceptible smile at the corner of his mouth. The trunk of the 35 were easier. Seeing Loren's progress, Snape shared knowledge on 35. The serpent skin we commonly use is boomslang. Serpentine creatures' scales are generally three types: smooth, granular, and keeled. The first two are self-explanatory. Keeled scales have a central vertical ridge. Loren noticed the 35 had all three types, a unique trait. Not especially interested in the biological taxonomy, he asked instead, "Professor, what are the uses for the different materials from a 35? Sectum sempra, Snape said, slicing another scale and dropping it into a trunk. Who knows? Loren said. Snape answered evenly, basilisks are far too rare. After Salazar Slytherin's time, the precise hatching rituals seem lost. Later, the Ministry strictly forbade the hatching and breeding of 35s. Unable to hold back, Loren interrupted. Professor, isn't it said that a 35 is born when a toad hatches a rooster's egg? Snape gave him a look. The silence said everything. Loren understood. Snape considered him foolish. Loren Morgan, Snape drawled with biting cadence, you don't think an extraordinarily dangerous XXX-class magical creature can be produced so simply, do you? There it was. When Snape thought he'd been dumb, he used his full name. Loren braced himself, then nodded. Previously, he had believed the rooster's egg story because it explained rarity. Rooster eggs are rare, so 35s are rare. Snape sneered. Use that head of yours that's full of orange juice. Inducing a rooster to lay an egg, inducing a toad to hatch it. Do you think any of that is simple? You have to choose the right astrological alignment, the proper breeds of rooster and toad, feed them certain things, any 37 with a bit of 41, making knowledge knows how demanding the conditions are. After the cold mockery, Snape returned to the creature's value. In Britain, there hasn't been a recorded sighting of a 35 for at least 400 years. He snorted with a hint of pride. A mature potions master can analyze a material's effects from the 45 it contains, its properties, and analogies to similar substances. If it's unique, all the better. It could yield a unique 41. Loren scratched his head. He wasn't a mature potions master yet and had no such swagger. In the dim light of the chamber, Snape explained how to theoretically analyze a 35's medicinal value. He lectured through lunch on related lore, speculative hatching rituals, placing the egg beneath a toad when Sirius is brightest, comparisons between the 35 Phi and the 8, and practical notes on handling. By afternoon, Loren declined Harry and Ron's invitation to a snowball fight, rested briefly, and returned to the chamber. Snape wasn't there yet, so Loren climbed onto the carcass and continued harvesting scales. Thanks to his talent for refining spells, Loren repeated Sectum Sempra castings until his form was smooth and fluid. Sectum Sempra. Sectum Sempra. When Snape returned, Loren had already filled several trunks. His speed had even surpassed Snape's in places. Sectum Sempra was Snape's own invention, and he couldn't help but notice Loren's leap in skill. At first, Loren watched a long time before casting, and mistakes remained. Now, as soon as his left hand lifted a scale, his right hand cast instinctively, with no hesitation. The harvested scales were flawless. Snape stood and watched for several minutes, staring at Loren's hands. He recognized Dumbledore's intention, grooming Loren as a successor, perhaps to become chief warlock of the Wizengamot, or even headmaster, trained to tidy up the world's messes and shield fools from their mistakes. Snape disagreed with that path. Loren had talent. Nicholas Flamel had chosen him in Snape's mind. Even without anyone saying it, Snape suspected Loren could proceed along Flamel's line, reconstructive alchemy, brilliant breakthroughs in potions, but the scene before him showed that Loren's talents went beyond potions. Loren tossed a fresh scale into a trunk and looked up when he saw Snape. Good afternoon, Professor, he called cheerfully. Snape responded softly and moved back to his place to continue cutting. He spoke less of the 35's medicinal value and shifted to the Potions Club and the school's business. A voice, dry and even, echoed in the chamber. Payments from the Essence of Rue sales are arriving. Because the school is holding a large sum independently of the Board of Governors for the first time, and without the accountants the board would have supplied, Professor McGonagall made some missteps handling such a large amount. Before complete financial independence, McGonagall couldn't expose the current situation. Previously, staff and student supplies had been handled under board supervision by specialized accountants, with McGonagall only approving expenditures. Now, with a sudden influx of discretionary funds, she lacked experience. Some details were mishandled, and the board had noticed discrepancies in the accounts. "Is it a big problem?" Loren asked while cutting. "Not huge," Snape said calmly, "but not trivial, normally manageable. However, if the board opens a thorough investigation, there could be trouble. Until the accounts are cleared before next school year, this side of the business will temporarily stop. Coincidentally, our ruse stock is near depletion, so the Potions Club will pause its previous activities." "Does that mean we'll start developing the resurrection potion?" Loren asked. Snape hummed assent, but didn't elaborate on the Potions Club's schedule. "Professor McGonagall plans to select a few graduates this year to hire as agents for the school's business. The main focus will remain 24, procurement of raw materials, brewing and development of 24, and sales." Loren listened and filed it away, even as he worked. Snape continued, "To avoid attracting the board's attention until profits can cover the school's expenses, sales will not be concentrated in Britain. We'll focus on markets in Africa, the United States, Egypt, and the like." Dumbledore seemed to have some connection with the American Magical Congress. He'd obtained the business license with surprising ease. By the time Snape finished briefing the other professors, every scale from the basilisk had been removed and packed into pre-prepared leather cases. With the scales gone, the creature's skin looked like rough gravel. Thick keratin and fragments made the carcass resemble a length of rock more than a living animal. Loren had been so absorbed in handling the scales, he hadn't noticed how the whole animal looked once it was skinned. Standing a little apart, surveying the dozens of feet-long behemoth, a deep sense of accomplishment swelled up in him. "How should we deal with the remaining flesh, organs, and bones?" he asked, excitement plain on his face. He was already picturing a full dissection. Snape was moving between the leather cases, counting the boxes of scales. Without looking up, he said, "I can handle the rest by myself. You don't need to assist." Loren had been called in primarily so Snape could test his use of Sectum Sempra. He could have summoned other professors if more hands were needed. A little deflated, he replied, "Oh." He'd imagined that processing the basilisk's flesh would be a major undertaking, something to keep him busy until Christmas. Instead, learning he wasn't needed left him disappointed. This was the first time he'd worked with such rare raw material. Compared to petty tasks like extracting snake venom or picking flower stamens, working on a dozens of feet-long basilisk offered a completely different kind of satisfaction. It was like solving a grueling final exam problem when you weren't much of a student, rewarding in a way nothing else was. Now, the hardest part seemed to be done, the equation set up, and just as the answer was within reach, the invigilator had said, "That's enough. I only needed to know you could do it." He didn't know how to describe it, but he felt a little flat. Snape still didn't look up. "The payment will be given to you after the corpse processing is finished," he added. That had been agreed from the start. Loren could choose some materials from the basilisk's body as his payment. "Oh," Loren said again, dispirited, and turned toward the Chamber of Secrets exit, preparing to leave. "Who said you could leave?" Snape's voice snapped, flat and without emotion, as if asking about the weather. Loren stopped. "Is there anything else, Professor?" he asked. "Humph." Snape's tone now carried sarcasm. "If I were you and I'd seen the carcass of a rare, large magical creature, I would stay and observe how my potions professor handles it. Not rush off to dinner, you glutton." Loren fell silent and obediently stood by to watch Snape's method. As Snape returned to the basilisk, Loren muttered under his breath, "So much temper, always speaking in barbs. He probably ate an entire Hungarian horntail for lunch." He still couldn't tell what had changed in Snape's mood over the day. Snape approached the carcass, extended his wand, and pressed it to the seam of one side of the basilisk's mouth. A bright sword-like white flash sparked at the tip. Holding his wand with casual precision, he walked slowly, the wand never leaving the creature's body. His movements weren't slow, but the basilisk was enormous. The process took time. From one corner of the mouth to the other, the wand traced a rote. Then he paused, retracted his hand, and said calmly to Loren, "Did you understand?" The crystalline blue in Loren's eyes dimmed as he reconstructed what he had just seen. It seems to be a combination of the severing charm, the disarming charm, the bat bogey hex, and sectum sempra, he ventured uncertainly. Snape's gaze softened slightly for the first time in the dim chamber. Sectum sempra is the foundation. The other charms control the cutting trajectory. Most importantly, you must have a clear route in your mind. Something clicked in Loren. This was the accumulation of a long professional. Helbo could breed a basilisk from nothing. Why can't alchemy? Trying is not a bad thing, Flamel said with a gentle smile, not discouraging him. He drifted back toward the cauldron and began to share what he knew about the basilisk's origins. Have you ever considered who first spread word of the basilisk's deadly gaze and how they first discovered it? He asked, manifesting an image of a basilisk. The virtual beast's eyes shone yellow on a simulated human figure. The figure instantly stiffened, went lifeless, and dissolved into specks of light. Perhaps someone observed a basilisk attack? Loren guessed. Flamel didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he asked, do you think the despicable Helbo bred the basilisk intentionally, or did such a monster hatch by accident? Loren hesitated. He remembered Snape's description, choosing astrological signs, selecting special breeds of roosters and toads, feeding them potions, inducing the rooster to lay an egg and the toad to hatch it. A complex, deliberate ritual. If it were a coincidence, the conditions were too stringent. If it were planned, such creative power seemed beyond an ordinary dark wizard. Flamel continued, guiding the thought. Have you noticed the figure named Medusa in Muggle mythology, associated with snakes and petrification? Could this be information left by long-lived individuals during their travels? Loren asked, recalling an earlier conversation with Flamel about the lives of the long-lived. Perhaps, Flamel said enigmatically. Although many orthodox magical texts claim the first person to breed a basilisk was the evil Helbo, the concept of the basilisk appears earlier. Pliny the Elder's Natural History, written in 77 AD, mentions a creature in the province of Cyrene, a snake no more than 12 finger-widths long, about 20 centimeters, with white spots on its head. Its breath could destroy shrubs, scorch grass, and shatter rocks. Its gaze was fatal. 12 finger-widths, much smaller than the basilisk we just worked on, Loren thought aloud. Destroying shrubs and scorching grass might be venom, but shattering rock? He was certain the basilisk's breath he'd encountered didn't have that kind of force. Putting the accounts together, he suggested, maybe an original small basilisk existed naturally, and Helbo used it as a prototype to breed the larger version. Flamel nodded. I think Helbo devised a set of artificial breeding rituals based on the natural breeding of an original basilisk. In doing so, he made trade-offs. He amplified the power of the eyes and increased size, but removed or weakened the breath. Or perhaps it was a mutation. What happened to the small basilisks? Why did they disappear? Loren asked. Extinction among magical creatures is not unusual, Flamel replied. Before Newt Scamander pushed for the Magical Creature Protection Act, creatures went extinct every year. Since the 14th century, I have personally witnessed several extinctions. He faded back into the cauldron. Loren's plan to mass-produce basilisk magic was effectively a failure. His first alchemical invention plan had failed as well. Before leaving the fantastic book, he asked Flamel about using Bloody Mary's mirror to treat the Longbottoms. Flamel warned him, I don't recommend entering the deep consciousness of a mentally confused patient. No one truly knows what that landscape is like. If the owner of that consciousness is hostile, it could harm you. What if the patient's family enters the consciousness instead? The patient wouldn't be hostile to their own family, Loren asked. Flamel gave no definitive answer. Loren left with more questions than answers. Coincidentally, there was indeed a book called Natural History, written in 77 AD, and its strange description of a small black snake with white markings, anything it touched dying, bore an eerie similarity to a passage Loren remembered from the snake catcher's tale about a strange venomous snake in the wilds of Yongzhou.